She dropped her bag at his feet, looked him dead in the eye, and said it plain as daybreak. "I didn't come here for a husband." The whole train platform went silent. Caleb Dawson hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. His jaw was tight, his hat was low, and every man standing behind him suddenly found somewhere else to look. She wasn't afraid of him. That was the part he couldn't figure out. Every woman he'd ever known had been afraid of something about him, his silence, his scars, his mountains. But this one, she just looked straight through him and told him the truth. Before we go any further, if this story is already getting under your skin, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment below, telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Silver Hollow, Colorado, 1884. And let's find out what really happened that day on the platform. The telegram had arrived on a Tuesday. Caleb Dawson had read it 3 times before he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket. He didn't know why he kept it there. Maybe because it was warm against his chest, and warmth was something his house had been short on for a very long time. Arriving November 4th. Morning train. E. Carter. That was all. No mention of what she looked like, no mention of what she expected, no promise, no reassurance, just a name and a date, precise and clean, like she was reporting for work rather than stepping into the rest of her life. His neighbor, Old Wade, had laughed when Caleb first mentioned the advertisement. "You putting out a notice in an Eastern paper?" Wade had shaken his head. "Son, what on God's green earth made you think a woman from Boston would survive one winter out here?" "I didn't ask her to survive," Caleb had said quietly. "I asked her to come." That was the difference. And Wade hadn't understood it, but Caleb hadn't expected him to. He had written the advertisement because 3 years of silence had finally gotten too heavy to carry alone. Not the loneliness of not having someone to talk to. Caleb could go weeks without conversation and feel no worse for it. But a different kind of silence. The kind that presses against the walls of a house at night and reminds a man of everything he's refused to feel. He hadn't written the advertisement like most men did. He hadn't listed what he owned, the 300 acres, the timber, the cattle, the reliable creek that ran year-round. He hadn't described himself with boasts. He had simply written the truth. "I am a rancher in the Colorado mountains. I work hard and I live quietly. I am not a man of many words, but I believe in fairness, in honesty, and in the value of real work. I am not looking for a woman to serve me. I am looking for someone who wants to build something. Someone who believes that a life made by 2 people who respect each other is worth more than a life made by 1 person alone." If that sounds like you write to me. He had shown it to no one before he sent it. He had been ashamed of it, a little of how exposed it sounded, how different from the advertisements the other men placed. But he had sent it anyway. 12 women had written back. He had read every letter. Most of them were kind. A few were desperate in a way that broke his heart a little. 2 of them had clearly been written by someone else. The grammar was too polished, the handwriting too practiced, and the sentiments too perfect to be real. And then there was Evelyn Carter's letter. She had not told him she was beautiful. She had not told him she was a good cook, or a devoted woman, or that she had always dreamed of a life in the open country. She had told him something entirely different. "Mr. Dawson, I am a seamstress and bookkeeper. I am 27 years of age, and I have been employed for the past 6 years by my uncle's mercantile business in Boston. I am competent at my work, and I am honest in my dealings. I am writing to you not because I am searching for a husband in the ordinary sense. I am writing because your advertisement was the first one I have read that did not treat a woman as a piece of furniture to be arranged in someone else's house. I do not know yet if I am the person you are looking for, but I know I am serious. If that matters to you, I would like to continue this correspondence." He had read that letter 4 times. Then he had written back the same evening, which was something he had done for none of the others. The morning train from Denver arrived 11 minutes late. Caleb stood on the platform with his hat in his hands and his heart doing something uncomfortable inside his chest. He was not a man who showed nerves. People in Silver Hollow had called him stone-faced before, sometimes admiringly, sometimes not. But standing there waiting, that was its own kind of exposure. The platform filled quickly. There were two other men waiting for women off the train, both of them with slicked-back hair and new boots, and the particular anxious energy of men who had spent too much time thinking about this moment. Caleb didn't slick his hair. He didn't wear new boots. He was exactly who he was, every other morning, worn jacket, clean shirt. The quiet patience of a man who had learned that nature didn't move faster just because you were in a hurry. The train slowed. The doors opened. People began to pour off miners heading for the hills, a family with too much luggage, a preacher in a collar who looked like he'd already begun composing his Sunday sermon in his head. And then she stepped out. He knew immediately that it was her. Not because she was the only woman traveling alone, though she was, but because of the way she moved. She didn't look around the platform with the scanning, uncertain eyes of someone hoping to be found. She stepped off that train like she had already decided what she was going to do next, and the world was simply the place where it was going to happen. She wore a dark blue traveling dress, practical and well-made. She carried one bag in her hand and one on her shoulder. Her hair was pinned up, but one piece had come loose in the wind, and she didn't bother to fix it. Her eyes were a particular shade of gray-green that Caleb would spend the next several months trying to name accurately and failing. She spotted him before he moved toward her. He could tell because she looked at him the way people look at something they've already studied, not surprised but confirming. He walked toward her, and she did not move. He stopped in front of her, close enough to speak without shouting. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Dawson," she said. Then she set her bag down at his feet and looked at him directly and said, "I didn't come here for a husband." He heard someone behind him suck in a breath. One of the other men waiting on the platform gave a short laugh that he quickly covered with a cough. Caleb didn't look away from her. He said, "I know." She blinked, just once and quickly, but he caught it. He'd surprised her. "You know," she said. "You said so in your third letter," he said. "You wrote, 'I want to be clear with you, Mr. Dawson, I am not coming to Colorado because I have run out of options. I am coming because this is the first choice I have made entirely for myself." She was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in her face. Not a smile, not yet, but something that might become one given enough time. "You remembered that," she said. "I remember everything you wrote," he said. "Every word." Another pause. The platform was thinning out now. The other two men had already walked off with their women, both pairs disappearing into town in a flurry of nervous conversation and polite introductions. Caleb and Evelyn stood where they were. "So," she said carefully, "if you knew I wasn't coming to marry you, why did you keep writing to me?" He picked up her bag. "Because you were the only one who told me the truth," he said. "Now, are you hungry? The cook at Miller's has a decent breakfast." She looked at him for another 3 seconds, measuring, he thought, deciding something. Then she said, "Yes, I'm hungry." And they walked off the platform together, not arm in arm, not with the easy closeness of people who knew each other yet, but side by side with a small and deliberate gap between them that felt more honest than any touching would have.
Get to the tag.
Breakfast at Miller's was not a quiet affair. The moment Caleb walked in with Evelyn at his side, every head in the place turned. Silver Hollow was not a large town. Caleb Dawson was not an invisible man. And a woman traveling from Boston to meet a mountain rancher was the kind of story that people in small mountain towns collected and traded like coins. Ruth Miller, 70 years old, built like a fence post and absolutely shameless, came out from behind her counter before they had even found a table. "So you're the one," she said to Evelyn, not unkindly, but without pretense. "I'm Evelyn Carter," Evelyn said, and offered her hand. Ruth shook it, looked her up and down with the frank appraisal of a woman who had spent decades making accurate assessments of people. "You're thinner than I expected," Ruth said, "but you've got good eyes. Sit down, I'll bring coffee." Caleb pulled out a chair for Evelyn. She sat without ceremony. "She does that to everyone," he said quietly as Ruth moved away. Don't take it to heart. I didn't, Evelyn said. She's just being honest. I find I prefer that. He sat down across from her. In the daylight of the diner, she looked different than she had on the platform, not less, but more specific. He could see now that she was tired from the journey, that there were faint circles beneath her eyes she hadn't bothered to conceal with powder. He respected that. Ruth brought coffee and 2 plates of eggs and cornbread without asking what they wanted. She'll do that until she decides you've earned the right to have opinions, Caleb said. Evelyn looked at the plate, then picked up her fork and ate without complaint. He noted that too. Tell me about the ranch, she said after a few minutes. Your letters describe the work, but not the place itself. What do you want to know? What it costs, she said. Genuinely. Not in money. In days. He set down his coffee cup. It costs early mornings and late nights, and a kind of patience that's hard to explain if you haven't lived it. It costs quiet, sometimes the right kind, sometimes the kind that gets heavy. It costs missing things, news from City's Variety, the kind of company that comes easy when you're surrounded by people. And what does it give? She asked. He thought for a moment. He was not a man who answered questions he hadn't thought about. It gives you the feeling that what you're building is real, he said finally. That it will outlast you. That when you put your hands to something here, it doesn't disappear when you look away. She was quiet for a moment, turning that over. I've spent 6 years, she said, building something for someone else. Every idea I had, every improvement I made, it went into my uncle's books, under his name. I made his business better, and when I asked to be recognized for it, he patted me on the shoulder and told me I was a good girl. She said the last 2 words with a precision that made them sound like something that had once cut her deeply and now simply left a scar. I'm not offering you recognition, Caleb said. I want to be straight about that. I don't know how to do that, to be honest. I don't really know what that looks like. No, she said. But you wrote to me like what I thought mattered. That's different. Ruth came back, topped off their coffee, gave them both a look that said she'd been listening and found the conversation acceptable, and left again. How long are you planning to stay? Caleb asked. It was not the question most men would have asked. Most men would have said, I hope you'll be happy here, or I think you'll come to love it. He asked how long she was planning to stay, because it was the honest question, because both of them needed to understand what this actually was before either of them attached anything heavier to it. I don't know, Evelyn said. A month to start. I need to see what I'm looking at. He nodded. That's fair. And if I decide it's not right, then you go, he said. Without argument, I won't hold you to anything you haven't agreed to. She looked at him steadily. You mean that? I mean everything I say, he said. It's one of my few virtues. She almost smiled. Almost. There it was again, that thing at the edge of her mouth that was thinking about becoming a smile, but hadn't fully committed yet. He thought he could be patient enough to wait for it. The ride to the ranch took most of the morning. Caleb drove the wagon. Evelyn sat beside him, not pressed against him, but not maintaining an anxious distance either. She had the posture of a woman who was used to sitting up straight, used to making herself occupy exactly the space she intended to, and no more. She asked questions the whole way out. Not conversational questions, not the weather, and whether she'd find the elevation hard, and did he know much about the history of the territory. She asked about the land itself, what the soil conditions were like near the creek, how many head of cattle he was running, and what the feed situation was going into winter, whether he'd had trouble with any of the local suppliers. He answered everything directly. He was not used to someone asking the questions she was asking, not a woman, not anyone. Most people who visited the ranch either fell silent at the beauty of it or fell into practical questions about the house. She wasn't asking about the house. You've thought about ranch management before, he said, after the third detailed question. My uncle ran a supply operation, she said. Half his business was feeding operations in the outlying counties, I kept the books for all of it. I understand the economics." "You understood it from the books," he said. Not unkindly, just honestly. "That's different from living it." "I know that," she said without defensiveness. "That's part of why I'm here. I want to understand it from both sides." He glanced at her sideways. "Most people don't make that distinction. Most people are afraid of not knowing things," she said. "I'm only afraid of not learning them." He turned back to the road, but that sentence settled somewhere in him like a stone finding the bottom of a still lake. He realized somewhere around the 3rd mile that he was looking forward to the rest of the day in a way he hadn't looked forward to anything in a long time. He kept that realization to himself. Day. The ranch hands were 3 in number: Jesper, who was 55 and had been with Caleb for 11 years, Danny, who was 23 and still learning which end of the cattle operation required more patience, and Tom, who said very little and worked very hard, and had come to the ranch under circumstances that Caleb had never shared with anyone and didn't intend to. When the wagon pulled in, all 3 of them were pretending to be busy with things that did not actually require their presence near the front of the property. Evelyn looked at the 3 of them, then at Caleb. "They're curious," she said. "They're worse than Ruth Miller," he said. "And at least Ruth is honest about it." He helped her down from the wagon. She took his hand briefly and then released it as soon as her feet were on the ground, which told him she was someone who accepted help when it was offered, but didn't require it, and walked her toward the house. Jesper materialized beside them almost immediately. "Miss Carter," he said with his hat off. "Welcome to the Dawson Ranch. I'm Jesper. I keep things running when the boss forgets that the rest of us exist." "That's mostly accurate," Caleb said. Evelyn shook Jesper's hand with the same directness she'd offered Ruth. "It's a pleasure. I have about 40 questions about the winter feed situation. Are you the right person to ask?" Jesper blinked, looked at Caleb, looked back at Evelyn. Then a smile broke across his weathered face, like sun coming over a ridge. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been waiting 11 years for someone to ask me that." Caleb, for the first time in a long time, felt something loosen in his chest. But the house was clean and simple. Caleb had made sure of that. He had spent the 2 weeks before Evelyn's arrival going over every corner of the place with a thoroughness that Jesper had noted and said nothing about, because Jesper was wise enough to know when a man's dignity required him to pretend no one was watching. He showed Evelyn to the spare room. It had a good window, a solid bed, a dresser with a cracked mirror that he'd meant to replace for 2 years. "The mirror," he started. "It's fine," she said. She walked to the window and looked out. He watched her take in what she was looking at: the wide reach of the high meadow, the dark line of timber to the north, the sky above it all, that was enormous in a way that city people either fell in love with or found crushing. "It's a lot of sky," she said. "Yes," he said. "I like it," she said quietly. Not with the enthusiasm of someone performing pleasure, with the quiet statement of someone who had just confirmed something they'd suspected about themselves. He nodded. "Good." He left her to settle in and went back out to the yard where Jesper was waiting with the particular expression of a man who has already formed several opinions and is choosing his words carefully. "Well," Caleb said. "She's not what I expected," Jesper said. "What did you expect?" "Someone softer," Jesper said. "Someone who'd look at all this and decide it was too much." She looked at it like she was calculating something. "She probably was," Caleb said. "That bother you?" Caleb thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I think I needed someone who would." The first dinner was simple. Caleb could cook not elegantly, but with the competence of a man who had lived alone for years and understood that food was fuel and that good fuel mattered. He made a venison stew with dried herbs and bread he'd baked 2 days ago that was a little past its best, but still decent. Evelyn came to the table without ceremony, sat down and waited. He brought the bowls over and sat across from her. They ate for a few minutes in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, more like the silence of 2 people who both knew that small talk was a waste of energy and were testing whether they could exist without it. Then Evelyn said, "Your bread is going stale." "I know," he said. "I can bake," she said. "I'm not asking you to," he said. She looked at him. "I know you're not. I'm offering because I want fresh bread, and I'm capable of producing it." He almost smiled. He was aware of it happening and controlled it. "Then be my guest," he said. "Also," she said, "your bookkeeping ledger. I saw it in the front room. The system you're using is inefficient. You're categorizing feed costs under general livestock, rather than separating by season. It's making it hard to identify your true winter overhead." He set down his spoon. "You looked at my ledger. The cover was open," she said without apology. "I couldn't help it. I notice numbers the way some people notice color." "And what did you conclude?" he asked. "That you're profitable, but you're leaving money on the table," she said. "Probably $20 to $30 a quarter just in purchasing inefficiency, possibly more." $20 to $30 a quarter was not a number Caleb Dawson dismissed lightly. "Show me," he said. She looked up from her stew. "Tonight?" she asked. "You already noticed it," he said. "I'd rather understand the problem than eat bread in denial." That did it. That was when the smile actually arrived, full and sudden and real, like a bird that had been deciding whether to land and finally committed. She had a good smile. Not a polished one. A real one. The kind that changed her whole face. "All right," she said. "After dinner." God. After dinner, they spread the ledger across the kitchen table, and Evelyn worked through it with the confident economy of someone doing what they were born to do. She didn't talk over him. She didn't talk down to him. She pointed to the numbers and explained her logic and asked him questions when she needed information he had, and she didn't, and he gave her the answers straight, and she fit them into the picture she was building, with a speed and accuracy that genuinely impressed him. He had met capable people before. He had respected them. But this was different. He was watching someone think. Actually, watching the process, the way she moved between columns, the way she held two figures in her head simultaneously, and compared them, the way she caught a discrepancy on page 14 that he'd been living with for so long it had become invisible to him. "There," she said, pointing. "You paid Connolly's supply twice for the same delivery in August. See. Same invoice number, different pages." He leaned in. She was right. "How did you catch that?" he said. "I've been catching these for 6 years," she said. "My uncle's operation had 3 people doing the books, and they still made mistakes like this every quarter. After a while, you develop a pattern recognition. The numbers start to talk to you." "Talk to you," he repeated. "You probably have the same thing with cattle," she said, glancing at him. "You can tell something's wrong with an animal before anyone else does. Can't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Same thing," she said simply, and turned back to the ledger. He watched her profile in the lamplight. The loose piece of hair had escaped from its pin again, and she absently pushed it back without interrupting what she was doing. Something shifted in him then. Not the falling in love kind of shift, it was too early for that, and he was too honest with himself to confuse it. But something older and quieter than that. A recognition of a kind of person he had almost stopped believing existed. Someone who would simply do the work. Not to prove something. Not to earn approval. Just because the work needed doing, and they were the one who could do it. He had lived by that principle his entire adult life, and never found it in another person. He hadn't expected to find it now. He hadn't expected her at all. She stayed past midnight. Not from obligation, he could see that she was tired, but because once she started, she didn't like leaving things unfinished. When she finally closed the ledger and straightened, she put her hands flat on the table and looked across at him. "Your operation is fundamentally sound," she said. "You have real strengths here. But you're running it like a man who's trying to do everything himself." "I am a man trying to do everything himself," he said. "That worked when it was only you," she said. "It won't work as you grow. Sooner or later you're going to hit a wall." "How long do you think I have?" he asked. She thought about it seriously, which he appreciated. 2 Maybe 3 years before you start losing efficiency, you can't recover on your own, she said. It's not urgent, but it's real. He nodded, filed it away. You should sleep, he said. The elevation will hit you harder tonight than it did today. She stood smoothing her skirt. I'll be fine. You'll think you're fine, he said. Then you'll wake up at 3 in the morning with a headache that feels like someone drove a nail through your temple. Drink water before you sleep, a full glass. It helps. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Has anyone ever told you that you give advice with a lot of certainty? She said. Has anyone ever told you that you resist good advice with a lot of energy? He replied. The almost smile was back. Slower this time, like she was less surprised by it. Good night, Mr. Dawson, she said. Good night, Miss Carter, he said. She went to her room. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after, in the particular silence of a man who has just realized that something has changed and is still determining what to do about that. He was awake before dawn as always. He moved quietly through the house, built up the fire, put the coffee on. He expected to have the early morning to himself the way he always did. Evelyn appeared in the kitchen doorway at 5:45, dressed and alert, with her hair properly pinned this time. He stared at her. I thought you'd sleep late, he said. First morning at elevation. I drank the water, she said. No headache. He handed her a coffee without comment. She took it, wrapped both hands around the cup, and looked out the kitchen window at the pre-dawn darkness. What needs doing first? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said, with a patience that was starting to sound like it had been practiced against considerable opposition. I want to understand how the days run here. You can't understand a place from the inside of a house. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Cattle check first. Then the fence line on the north quarter. I had a section blow out in the last storm, and Jesper and I have been patching it, but it needs proper repair before the real cold comes. How long does the fence line take? Half a day with 2 people. Then I'll help with the fence line, she said. Miss Carter, I'm stronger than I look, she said. And I've been sitting in trains and stagecoaches for 5 days. I need to use my body, or I'll go mad. He set down his coffee cup. The work is rough, he said. The ground is frozen at the surface. The wire is heavy. Yes, she said. Your hands will be sore. Yes, she said again. He looked at her for 3 full seconds. All right, he said. Finish your coffee. She was, as she had promised, stronger than she looked. She didn't complain about the cold. She didn't ask how much longer they had to go. She watched what Caleb and Jesper did with the wire and the posts, and she figured out how to be useful without being asked twice. By the end of the morning, Jesper was passing her the wire stretcher without thinking about it, the way he passed it to Caleb as a matter of course, as an assumption that she would know what to do with it. She did. At noon they stopped. Jesper produced a tin of biscuits from somewhere. They stood in the cold eating. You've done fence work before, Jesper said to her. Never, she said. He looked at her with frank admiration. Natural aptitude, he said. I watched what you were doing, she said. It's not complicated if you pay attention. Most people don't pay attention, Jesper said. That's the whole problem with most people. Caleb said nothing, but he was watching her. He was watching the way she stood, straight-backed and easy, not trying to take up less space than she occupied. The way she ate the biscuit without ceremony, and didn't make a performance of finding it good or bad. The way she looked out at the mountain line to the north with an expression that was trying to decide whether it was going to settle into something permanent. He thought, she's still deciding. He thought, I hope she decides to stay. Then he thought, that's dangerous. Then he went back to the fence. 3 days in, something happened that Caleb hadn't expected. He came into the kitchen in the late afternoon and found Evelyn sitting at the table, not with the ledger, not with any work, just sitting. Her coffee had gone cold in front of her. She was staring at the wall. He stopped in the doorway. Miss Carter. She blinked, came back from wherever she'd been. Sorry, she said. Don't be, he said. He came in and sat down across from her. Not close, just present. What is it? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I got a letter this morning. I picked it up at the post office when I rode into town for the flour. He waited. It's from my aunt, she said, telling me that my uncle has already replaced me at the business, that he hired a boy actually 22 years old, and that he's already paying him nearly twice what he paid me. She said it flat, without drama. But he could hear the thing underneath it, not just the injustice of the number, but the confirmation of something she had always known and had refused until this moment to see fully. That must hurt, he said. She looked at him sharply, as if she expected something different. It doesn't surprise me, she said carefully. But yes, it hurts. He nodded. My father left the ranch to my brother, he said. Not because my brother was older or more capable, because he was a son. She looked at him. My brother didn't want it, Caleb continued. He went to Denver, built a life there. He's fine. But for a long time, I was angry, not that my father made the choice he made, but that he never once considered any other choice. Not even for a moment. The possibility didn't exist for him. Evelyn was very still. What did you do with the anger? She asked. I built something better than what he left, Caleb said simply. I didn't do it at him. But I let the anger go when the work started to matter more than proving something. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm not sure I'm there yet, she said quietly. I wasn't either, he said. For quite a while. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the wind was picking up. He could feel it through the walls, the soft pressure of cold air finding the seams of the house. More coffee, he said. She looked at her cup. Mine's cold. I know, he said. I'll make fresh. And that was the moment, not a romantic moment. Nothing theatrical about it, just the ordinary moment of one person offering to make something better, and another person accepting it. The small, real fabric of what it meant to be in the same space as someone, and to mean them no harm. He got up and put the kettle on. And Evelyn Carter let out a breath she had been holding very likely for the better part of 6 years. By the end of the first week, the rhythm of the days had begun to take shape. Evelyn woke early. She drank her coffee in the kitchen before the light came fully. She went out with Caleb for the morning work, not always but often enough that Jesper had stopped looking surprised. She spent the middle part of the day on the books improving the system with a quiet relentlessness that Caleb found both useful and slightly humbling. She made bread on Thursdays. It was better than his. He told her so. Once. She said, I know, and moved on, which was he was coming to understand her version of accepting a compliment. In the evenings they talked, not always about the ranch. Sometimes about other things, about the books she'd read, about ideas she'd formed about how the territory was going to change as it grew, about what she thought about the politics of the West and how they intersected with the economics, which was a subject Caleb had never heard a woman speak about with that kind of authority before. He didn't interrupt her. He listened. That she told him one evening was the most surprising thing about him. What is, he said. You actually listen, she said. You don't wait for me to finish so you can say what you were already thinking. You change what you think based on what I say. Is that unusual? He said. She looked at him with an expression that was almost sad. More than you know, she said. The trouble started, as it often does, not with something large, but with something small. It was a Wednesday, the 12th day of her stay, when Caleb rode into Silver Hollow for supplies, and came back with the weight of something he hadn't planned to carry. Gerald Birch had stopped him outside the feed store. Gerald Birch was the kind of man who said nothing useful, and believed he was saying everything important. He had a ranch south of town, more money than sense, and a long memory for any piece of information that might give him social advantage. Dawson, he said, coming up behind Caleb with his thumbs in his vest pockets. Here you've got yourself a woman out there. Caleb loaded a sack of feed without turning around. I have a guest, he said. A guest, Birch repeated with a particular tone. From Boston. That's right. Pretty. Caleb turned around then. Slowly. And he looked at Gerald Birch with the flat, patient gaze of a man who had decided he was going to speak very precisely and only once. She's a professional woman, he said. An experienced bookkeeper and businesswoman. She's helping me reorganize the ranch accounts. You'd do well not to say anything beyond that. Birch smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Sure. I just heard she turned you down. Came all the way out here and told you she didn't want a husband. Right there on the platform. Half the town heard it. Caleb said nothing. Embarrassing, Birch said, with the satisfied look of a man delivering bad news he has been saving. Only for people who think it should be, Caleb said. And he picked up his supplies and left. But he carried it with him all the way home, not the embarrassment, because he felt none, but the awareness that the story was circulating, that people were telling it with a particular slant, and that Evelyn, sooner or later, was going to hear it. She heard it that same evening. She'd ridden into town herself in the afternoon for thread she needed. Ruth Miller had told her, probably with the best of intentions and a complete absence of tact, that people were saying some things. What kinds of things? Evelyn had asked in the even voice of a woman who has learned that asking directly is faster. Ruth told her. Evelyn came home quiet in a way she hadn't been since she arrived. Caleb noticed it at dinner. He waited. Halfway through the meal she said, I heard what people are saying. I know, he said. I heard too. That I humiliated you, she said. He set down his fork. You didn't. I told you on a public platform that I didn't come for a husband, she said, in front of witnesses. You told the truth, he said. I don't consider that humiliation. She looked at him. Some men would. I'm not some men, he said. A pause. People are going to assume things, she said carefully, about what I'm doing here, about us. It could damage your reputation in town. My reputation in town, he said, is currently that I'm a serious, solitary man who works hard and keeps to himself. I don't know that it would suffer much from the addition of a capable woman. She almost laughed. The almost laugh was almost as good as the smile. I'm serious, Caleb, she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. He didn't point it out, but he heard it clearly. So am I, he said. The only thing people here need to know is that you're helping me run a better operation, and that I'm glad you're here. The rest isn't their business. She was quiet for a moment. And if they think she started. Let them think what they want, he said. We know what this is. She nodded slowly. Yes, she said. But he had the distinct feeling that the word yes was doing more work in that sentence than it appeared to be. At the end of the second week, she said she was extending her stay. She said it simply standing in the doorway of the barn while he was checking on one of the mares that had been favoring a front leg. I'd like to stay through the end of the month, she said, if that's still agreeable to you. He didn't look up from the mare's leg. It's agreeable, he said. A pause. I want to finish the ledger reorganization, she said. It would be a disservice to leave it half done. Of course, he said. Another pause. And I want to see what the ranch looks like in snow, she said. He did look up then. She was leaning against the doorframe, looking at him with that expression he was beginning to recognize, the one that was being more honest than she'd intended. You'll see it, he said. It's coming. Good, she said. And she pushed off the doorframe and went back toward the house. He stood there with his hand on the mare's knee and looked at the empty doorway for a long moment. She wants to see what the ranch looks like in snow. He thought about that for the rest of the evening. She didn't need to explain it, but he understood it perfectly. She was looking for evidence that this place that he would still be worth staying for when things got hard. He thought I can give her that evidence. He thought I hope it's enough. He thought I hope I'm enough. That last thought scared him more than anything had in years. The snow came on a Friday. He woke at 5:30 to find it already falling quiet and steady and thick, the kind of snow that doesn't announce itself but simply arrives and intends to stay. He put on his coat and went outside. He stood in the yard and looked at the white beginning to cover the mountains. He heard the door behind him. He didn't have to turn around to know it was her. She came and stood beside him, not close, not far, just beside him, and they stood in the early darkness and watched the snow come down together. "There it is," she said softly. "There it is," he said. They stood there for a long time. Neither of them spoke. And in that silence, that specific silence, which was nothing like the heavy silences he had lived with alone for years, which was instead a silence with someone else's breath in it, someone else's warmth at the edge of it, Caleb Dawson felt something he had spent 11 years convincing himself he didn't need. He felt like he wasn't alone. He did not say this out loud, but he thought very clearly standing there in the snow beside a woman who had come to Colorado, looking for a life and not a husband, "I am in serious trouble." And for the first time in as long as he could remember, standing there in the snow, beside a woman who had come to Colorado, looking for a life and not a husband, Caleb Dawson didn't mind being in trouble at all. But trouble, he had learned, had a way of arriving in pairs. The first snow was beautiful for exactly 4 days. Then the temperature dropped 15 degrees overnight, and the beautiful became brutal, the way it always did in the high mountains. The way people who had never lived through a Colorado winter never quite believed until it happened to them. Caleb watched Evelyn that 5th morning, carefully waiting for the moment she would look at the cold and decide it was too much. He'd seen it before, not from women specifically, but from people. The moment when the reality of the place pressed harder than the idea of it, and the idea started to lose. She didn't lose. She came out in the dark before 5:30 wearing 2 coats layered over each other, her breath coming in small white clouds, and she said, "The water trough near the north barn is frozen solid. I already broke the surface with the axe handle. You're welcome." He stared at her. "You were up before me," he said. "By about 20 minutes, she said without apology. He had no response to that. So he handed her his coffee, which she took without comment, and went to assess the damage she hadn't mentioned, because she was already moving on to the next problem, which was the way she operated he was learning. She didn't wait for recognition of the thing she'd just done. She was already at the next thing. Jesper found Caleb standing in the yard holding an empty cup and watching Evelyn disappear into the barn. "She broke the north trough ice," Caleb said. "I know," Jesper said. "I watched her from the bunkhouse window. She didn't know I was watching." He paused. "She talked to the horses while she did it." "What did she say?" "She told them it wasn't their fault the weather was stupid." Jesper looked at Caleb with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not succeeding. "I like her," he said. "In case you were wondering." "I wasn't," Caleb said. "Yes, you were," Jesper said, and went to start his morning. The problem with that conversation was that Jesper was right, and Caleb knew it, and knowing it didn't make it any easier to know what to do with it. Because the situation was specific and delicate in ways that Caleb didn't have much practice navigating. Evelyn Carter had come here under clear terms. She was here to see if this life suited her, and nothing more had been agreed to, and he was not the kind of man who pushed against agreed terms just because his feelings had developed opinions of their own. But his feelings had very definite opinions. And the problem with feelings that have opinions is that they start to make themselves known in ways you can't always control. He controlled them, for now. He told himself, "You don't know yet if she's staying. Don't build on land you don't own." He went to do his work. The cold brought with it a particular kind of forced proximity. In the warmer months, there were always reasons to be in different parts of the ranch at different times. Wide spaces and outdoor work created natural distance between people. But when the temperature dropped this hard, the whole operation contracted toward heat and shelter. And that meant that Caleb and Evelyn were sharing the same rooms, the same fire, the same table for longer stretches than they had been before. He noticed things he hadn't had occasion to notice. The way she hummed when she was concentrating just under her breath, irregular, not quite a melody. The way she held her pen differently than anyone he'd ever watched write, not the way you learned in school, but the way of someone who had spent 10,000 hours using it and had made adjustments for efficiency. The way she laughed rarely, and when she did, it was quick and real. Not the kind of laugh women sometimes performed for men's benefit, but the kind that surprised even her. He noticed these things, and he filed them away, and he said nothing about any of them. What he didn't know. What he had no way of knowing, because Evelyn Carter was exceptionally good at presenting only the parts of herself she had decided to present, was that she was noticing things too. She noticed that he fixed things before they broke, rather than after. She noticed that he said, "I don't know," with complete ease when he didn't know something, which was a thing she had almost never heard a man in authority say. She noticed that he never once in 3 weeks talked about what she owed him or what he'd done for her. He simply did what needed doing and expected the same from her. And the equality of that expectation was something she had been hungry for so long. She hadn't known she was starving until she felt full. She noticed that he was lonely in a very specific way, not the loud, searching loneliness of someone who doesn't know how to be alone, but the quiet, bone-deep loneliness of someone who has been alone so long, they've stopped expecting it to change. That particular loneliness she recognized. She had it too. It was Danny who created the first real crisis. Danny was 23 and well-meaning, and had the gift, common to young men, of causing disasters from a place of total innocence. He had ridden into town on a supply run and come back with flour, salt, 3 spools of wire, and apparently, without understanding what he was carrying, a piece of gossip that he delivered at the dinner table, with the cheerful energy of someone who thought he was sharing interesting news. "People in town are saying Miss Carter's going to be moving on soon," he said, reaching for the bread without looking up. "On account of she couldn't find what she was looking for out here." The table went very quiet. Caleb put down his fork. Jesper, who had more instinct for social danger than anyone Caleb had ever met, reached over and took the breadbasket out of Danny's reach for no apparent reason. Evelyn did not look up from her plate immediately. She took one slow breath. Then she set down her own fork and looked at Danny with a gaze that was absolutely calm and absolutely terrifying. "Who said that?" she asked. Danny, to his credit, realized immediately that he had done something wrong, though he didn't yet understand the full shape of it. A few people, at Birch's store. Mr. Birch himself, actually." "Gerald Birch," Caleb said. "Yes, sir." Caleb picked his fork back up. "Gerald Birch also said last spring that my creek would run dry by August. I had water through October." He looked at Danny. "Consider your sources." Danny nodded vigorously, grateful to have received something to agree with. Evelyn, however, was not finished. "What exactly did he say?" she asked. Still that same calm, which Caleb had learned was actually the most dangerous version of her. Danny hesitated. "Danny," she said, "please." "He said," Danny swallowed. "He said that you came out here thinking you were better than the situation, and now you'd realized the situation was better off without you." He said it all very fast, like getting it out quickly would make it hurt less. It didn't. The table held its silence. Then Evelyn picked her fork back up, took a bite of her stew, chewed it thoughtfully, and said, "That's a very specific thing for someone who has never spoken to me to say." "He's a fool," Jesper said flatly. "He's a strategic fool," Evelyn said. "Which is worse?" She looked at Caleb. "He's trying to push me out." "Yes," Caleb said. "Why?" Caleb was quiet for the moment. Then he said, "Because he made an offer on this property 2 years ago, and I turned him down. He's been waiting for a reason to believe I made a mistake." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "And a woman who doesn't fit in, or who leaves early, that becomes the story he tells about why this ranch is failing." "That's about right." She nodded slowly. "Then I'd better not leave early." Danny, confused, but relieved that the danger had apparently passed him, specifically reached for the breadbasket. Jesper let him have it this time. Under the table, where no one could see it, Caleb's hand had closed into a fist against his knee. Not from anger, from something else entirely, from the particular tension of wanting to say something and knowing the moment wasn't right. He kept it to himself. For now. 3 days later, Evelyn rode into town alone. She didn't tell Caleb where she was going specifically. She said she needed thread and stamps. She was back by noon and she said nothing about what else had happened. But that evening, Ruth Miller appeared at the ranch door with a pot of soup. She said she'd made too much of, which was the most transparent excuse for a social visit Caleb had ever witnessed. And Ruth Miller sat down at the kitchen table and looked at Evelyn with an expression that mixed admiration and amusement in roughly equal parts. "I heard what you said to Gerald Birch," Ruth said. Caleb looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was pouring the soup into a bowl and did not look up. "I just told him the truth," she said. "You told him," Ruth said with evident delight, "that his opinion of your plans was about as relevant to your decisions as the weather patterns in Brazil, and that if he was going to circulate stories about you, he might at least have the courtesy to get the facts right." "That's what I said," Evelyn confirmed. "You said it in the middle of his store," Ruth said, "in front of 4 customers. Well," Evelyn said, finally looking up, "I didn't want there to be any ambiguity." Ruth turned to Caleb with the expression of someone presenting him with something valuable. "I like her," she said. "I know," Caleb said. "She's better than you deserve," Ruth said cheerfully, and helped herself to the soup. Caleb said nothing to that, because he suspected Ruth Miller was not wrong. But here is what Evelyn had not said at the dinner table, and had not said to Ruth Miller, and had not said to anyone at all. When she had walked into Birch's store that morning, when she had said what she'd said, and watched Gerald Birch's face go through 4 different colors, she had not been entirely calm on the inside. She had been shaking, not with fear, with the particular physical manifestation of fury that she had spent 27 years learning to keep contained, because a woman who showed her anger was labeled difficult, and a difficult woman was made to disappear from the places she needed to be. She had learned to swallow it, to let it run cold instead of hot, to speak from that cold, flat place that sounded like control even when her hands were trembling. She had walked out of Birch's store and stood in the cold air for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds. Then she had straightened her coat, collected her thread and her stamps, and ridden home. And sitting at that dinner table that evening, listening to Ruth Miller talk with the easy confidence of a woman who had never had to swallow anything, Evelyn had felt something loosen. Not disappear, just loosen. Like a knot that had been tied very tight for a very long time and had just slightly given. She looked at Caleb across the soup pot. He was listening to Ruth with that particular quality of attention he brought to everything, full and unhurried, like he had all the time in the world for what was being said. Even when it was Ruth Miller saying it, which was, Evelyn had come to understand not everyone's experience. He looked up and caught her looking. She looked back at her bowl. But she felt it that small, dangerous, inconvenient warmth. She was going to have to think about that. The second major twist arrived on a Wednesday morning without warning, the way the important things always did. Caleb had gone into the north section to check on a fence line that Jesper reported had taken wind damage overnight. He expected to be back by midday. He was back in 40 minutes. Evelyn heard him come in, heard the particular cadence of his footsteps that meant something was wrong, and came out of the front room where she'd been working. He was standing in the hallway with his coat still on and a look on his face she hadn't seen before. Something had gone out of him, not his composure that was intact, but something underneath it. Some foundation she hadn't realized was always there until she saw it shaken. "What happened?" she said. "Roy Callahan called in his note," Caleb said. She knew who Roy Callahan was. She had found his name in the ledger, a private creditor who had lent Caleb a significant sum 4 years ago when the cattle operation was expanding at a reasonable rate on a long repayment schedule that had another 3 years on it. "He can't do that," she said immediately. "The terms?" "He says the terms include a clause about material change in circumstance," Caleb said. His lawyer sent a letter. "What material change?" Caleb looked at her steadily. "He says it's you." She was very still. "Me. He says my having a woman on the property who isn't my wife represents an instability of moral character that voids his confidence in the investment." Caleb said it flat and clean, without inflection. "It's language from the letter. I'm not saying it's mine." Evelyn sat down. Not from weakness, but because she needed to think, and thinking required stillness. And the kind of thinking she needed to do right now was the kind that needed all of her. "How much is the note?" she asked. He told her. It was a significant number, not ruinous but serious. If he had to call it in full within the 30-day window the letter was allowing, it would strip out most of the operating reserve and leave the ranch lean going into the hardest season. "Who is Roy Callahan really?" she asked. Behind the note, Caleb met her eyes. He plays cards with Gerald Birch on Thursday evenings. She absorbed that. He went after your money because he couldn't go after your reputation directly, she said. Because you've already made clear you don't care about your reputation. That's what I think, Caleb said. Then this is about me leaving, she said. If I go, the pressure point disappears. Possibly, he said. Would you tell me if you wanted me to go? He looked at her with something in his face that was very clear. No, he said. I wouldn't tell you to go. Not for Roy Callahan, not for Gerald Birch, not for any of them. She held his gaze for a moment. All right, she said. Sit down, let me think. He sat. She didn't notice she was already working. She pulled the ledger toward her from where she'd left it on the side table. She went through 3 months of figures in 20 minutes, speaking only twice to ask Caleb a specific question about the cattle sale schedule and the expected revenue from the timber lease. He answered both questions precisely. At the end of 20 minutes, she sat back and looked at him. You can cover the note, she said. Not comfortably, but you can do it. If you advance the timber sale by 6 weeks, I know you wanted to wait until spring for the better price, but the margin difference is smaller than the risk of carrying this through winter under legal pressure. And if you negotiate a partial early payment instead of full. I know the letter says full, but letters say what they say, and negotiations say something different. A creditor who wants his money back is more flexible than his lawyer sounds. Caleb was quiet. I can write the letter, she said, if you want me to. You know how to write that kind of letter. I've written 50 of them, she said. My uncle's suppliers tried to push him around every time they thought they had leverage. Usually they were wrong. I learned to tell them so in terms they understood. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, write it. She nodded. And then she said more quietly, I'm sorry this happened because of me. It didn't happen because of you, he said. It happened because some men can't tolerate anything they don't control. You're not responsible for that. She looked at him. You're not angry. Not at you, he said. Caleb. She used his name deliberately, the way she only did when she wanted to make sure she had his full attention. This could get worse before it gets better. If Birch is behind this and it doesn't work, he'll try something else. I know, he said. It might be smarter for me to... Don't, he said. One word. Quiet. Absolute. She closed her mouth. Write the letter, he said again. She picked up her pen. The letter went out on Thursday. By the following Tuesday, Roy Callahan's lawyer had responded with a counter that was significantly more reasonable than the original terms. By Friday, they had an arrangement, an adjusted early payment that Caleb could manage without depleting his reserves, and a formal release of the clause that had been invoked. Evelyn read the final letter twice, then set it on the table in front of Caleb and said, done. He read it. Then he said, how did you know he'd back down? Because he invoked the clause based on instability, she said. My letter made the case that the ranch accounts had never been more stable than in the past month, with verifiable figures attached. It's very hard to argue instability when someone hands you 3 pages of evidence to the contrary. He looked at the letter, then at her. You put the ledger revisions in there. I put the results of the ledger revisions in there, she said. Every efficiency improvement, every corrected invoice, every recategorized expense, I showed him exactly what the ranch is worth under proper management. She paused. I thought you'd want that on record. He was quiet for a moment. That was smart, he said. I know, she said. He looked up at her. And then he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He laughed. Just briefly. Just one short, real sound of genuine amusement. But it changed his face completely, the way a window changes a room when someone finally opens it. She felt it land somewhere in her chest and stay there. This was becoming a problem. The problem had a name, and the name was this. Evelyn Carter had come to Colorado with a plan. The plan was to assess the situation, understand what this life offered, and make a rational decision about whether it was what she wanted. She had been so certain of her own rationality. She had staked her independence on it. But somewhere between the frozen water trough and the Callahan letter, something had happened that her rationality had not fully accounted for. She had started to belong here. Not to Caleb. She was careful about that distinction. Careful the way a person is careful with fire when they know they can be burned. Not to him. But to this, to the early mornings, and the cold, and the work that left her tired in the right way, and the ledger that was finally starting to reflect the real value of what the ranch was, and Jesper's biscuits on fence days, and Ruth Miller's forthright opinions, and Danny's disasters, and the particular silence of the high mountains at night that was nothing like the silence of Boston rooms, and pressed against her, not with loneliness, but with something that felt inconveniently like peace. She had not planned to belong anywhere. Belonging was dangerous for a woman who needed to be free to leave. She went for a walk alone one evening, which she did sometimes needing the particular clarity that came from moving through cold air with no one's thoughts but her own. And she stood at the edge of the property where the land opened up and looked at what was there. She thought about the letter from her aunt, the boy they'd hired to replace her at twice her salary. She thought about what Caleb had said, "I built something better than what he left me." She thought about what it would mean to do that, to build something here, not for Caleb, alongside him, with him. She thought about the fact that she was thinking about it at all, and that frightened her more than the cold. She went back inside. She said nothing to anyone, but Caleb saw it. He saw the things she was working through in the way she was quieter over the next few days, in the way she looked at the mountains sometimes, with something that was no longer just assessment, but something she hadn't named yet. He said nothing either. He was waiting, not impatiently, not with the anxious waiting of a man who needed an answer, with the particular patience of someone who had learned that the most important things moved in their own time, and pushing them only pushed them away. He waited. It was Jesper who broke the silence, because Jesper had never in his life been able to tolerate a silence that he felt needed breaking. He cornered Caleb in the barn on a Sunday afternoon when the others were occupied elsewhere, and he said without preamble, "You're in love with her." Caleb kept his eyes on the harness he was repairing. "That's not your business." "I've been your business for 11 years, Jesper said, "which arguably makes your business my business." He leaned against the stall. "Does she know?" "No." "Are you going to tell her?" "When it's the right time." "Caleb." Jesper said his name with the particular heaviness of a man who has watched someone he cares about make the same mistake more than once. The right time has a way of becoming the wrong time if you wait long enough. Caleb set down the harness and looked at Jesper directly. "She came here with specific terms. She told me from the beginning she wasn't looking for this. If I say something before she's ready, I make her feel like the whole arrangement was a trap. I make her feel like I had a different agenda all along, and then she leaves." He picked the harness back up. "I'm not willing to risk that." Jesper was quiet for a long moment. "What if she's ready and she's waiting for you?" he said. Caleb didn't answer. Jesper nodded slowly, as if an answer had been given anyway. "All right," he said. "But don't wait too long. Winter doesn't last forever, and neither do chances." He left. Caleb sat with the harness in his hands and the quiet of the barn around him. Don't wait too long. He already knew that. The problem was knowing when too long was too long. The problem was that he had been wrong about timing before, deeply permanently wrong, and the cost of that had been years of the heavy silence he was only now beginning to lift. He was afraid, not of saying the wrong thing, of losing the right person because he said the right thing at the wrong moment. He went back to the harness. He told himself not yet, but soon. The letter arrived on a Thursday in the first week of December. Evelyn found it with the rest of the mail that had been held for her at the Silver Hollow post office, collected by Danny on his weekly supply run. She didn't open it at the table. She took it to her room, which was something she only did when she suspected the contents would require privacy for her reaction. Caleb noticed she didn't come out for dinner. He knocked on her door at 7 o'clock. "Miss Carter." A pause. Then, "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine," he said. "Dinner's getting cold." Another pause. The door opened. She had been crying. She had stopped, and she had done the things she did to collect herself. But he had learned her face well enough by now to see the residue of it, the slightly heightened color, the particular steadiness that people have when they are holding themselves together deliberately. He didn't comment on any of it. "Come eat," he said. She came. They ate in the quiet that was theirs by now. Not the dinner table quiet of strangers, but the particular quiet of people who had enough shared language that silence was a choice rather than a gap. After a while she said, "The letter was from a colleague in Boston, a woman who worked at the company in the department below mine." She paused. "She wrote to tell me that my uncle is being investigated. Financial irregularities in the accounts." He was quiet, listening. She also wrote to tell me, Evelyn continued, that the investigators asked to speak with former employees, particularly ones with bookkeeping experience. She looked at the table. She wanted me to know before they contacted me directly. "Will you cooperate?" he asked. She looked up at him. "Yes," she said. "Of course." "That's the right answer," he said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not upset about the investigation. My uncle has been doing questionable things with the accounts for years. I suspected it. I couldn't prove it. I didn't have access to the parts of the books that would have shown it." She paused. "I'm upset because a 22-year-old boy now has access to those books and apparently provided the evidence I couldn't, and the only reason he has that access is because he's a man and I wasn't." He let that sit. Then he said, "You're not upset that he did it. You're upset that you should have been the one who could." She looked at him sharply. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly it." He nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. Not the empty apology people make to fill space. A real one. A specific one. The apology of someone who understood precisely what was being mourned. She looked at him for a long moment. "You understand it," she said. "Don't you? You actually understand it." "I understand what it is to work for something and have someone else receive the credit," he said. "I understand what it is to be excluded from a room where decisions about your life are being made. It's not the same as what you've experienced, I know that. But I understand the outline of it." She was quiet. And then she said something that surprised both of them. "I'm glad I came here," she said, softly. Not to the table. To him. He held very still. "I'm glad you came too," he said. They looked at each other across the table. The fire in the kitchen stove was the only sound. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. And in that held moment, that 3 seconds or 30 seconds that existed outside the ordinary passage of time, something passed between them that was too specific to be called friendship, and too honest to be called anything less than what it was. She looked away first. "Thank you for dinner," she said quietly. "Thank you for eating it," he said. She went to her room. He sat at the table for a long time. Jesper's voice in his head said, "Don't wait too long." He was beginning to think that too long might be approaching faster than he'd planned. Outside, the Colorado night pressed against the windows, and the mountains held their white silence. And somewhere between the cold and the fire, and the woman behind the closed door down the hall, Caleb Dawson quietly and completely understood that his life had already changed. He just didn't know yet if she knew it too. He just didn't know yet if she knew it too. And the not knowing was starting to cost him sleep in a way that nothing had in a very long time, which was its own kind of answer, even if he wasn't ready to say it out loud. The days that followed the dinner table moment were different. Not dramatically different. Not the kind of different that announces itself and demands to be discussed. But Caleb felt it in the small things, the way Evelyn moved through the house with a slightly altered ease, like a person who has made an invisible decision and is now living a few degrees more honestly because of it. She laughed a little more readily. She pushed back on his opinions a little more directly. She stopped being quite so careful about the space between them when they worked side by side at the kitchen table over the ledger. He didn't mention any of it. He just paid attention the way he paid attention to everything that mattered quietly and completely. What he didn't know was that Evelyn was paying attention too. To him. To herself. To the growing and inconvenient fact that the plan she had arrived with, a set-aside stay or leave on rational grounds, had developed a serious flaw, which was that her feelings had stopped being rational sometime around the second week, and she had only now caught up to that fact. She was thinking about the future, not in the abstract way she had thought about it in Boston, where the future was a series of obstacles she intended to overcome, but in the specific, textured, dangerous way, the way that included particular mornings and particular dinners, and the specific sound of boots on a porch, and a man who said, "I don't know," without shame, and fixed things before they broke. She told herself it was appreciation. Gratitude for a situation that had turned out better than expected. That was the safe version of what she was feeling. She knew it wasn't the safe version. She just wasn't ready to say so. Not to him. Not yet. And not to herself in any language more precise than the one she was using. So she did what she had always done when something frightened her. She worked harder. Tje. It was Jesper who noticed the change in both of them and said nothing, because Jesper understood that some things move best when they're left alone. Danny noticed something was different and said something about it immediately at breakfast one morning. "You two are being weird." And both Caleb and Evelyn looked at him with expressions so similar in their controlled blankness that Danny looked between them, appeared to do a rapid calculation, and suddenly became very interested in his eggs. Tom, who said very little under ordinary circumstances, said nothing at all, which was his version of having noticed everything. Ruth Miller came out to the ranch on a Tuesday, ostensibly to return a bowl she'd borrowed, and sat at the kitchen table for an hour and a half, and watched Caleb and Evelyn work through a purchasing decision together, the back and forth of it, the way they each pushed the argument forward without crowding the other, the way they landed on conclusions that were better than what either of them had started with. And when she left, she pressed Caleb's arm at the door and said, "Don't be a fool," and was gone before he could respond. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "What did she mean by that?" Evelyn called from the kitchen. "Hard to say with Ruth," he said. "She means several things at once." He closed the door. He knew exactly what she meant. The crisis arrived on a Thursday in mid-December, which was, Caleb thought afterward, consistent with the way the hardest things in his life had always arrived. Not when he was braced for them, but in the middle of an ordinary day, wearing ordinary clothes, looking like something manageable. He had ridden out to the east boundary in the early morning. Evelyn was at the house working through the new supplier correspondence she'd been reorganizing. The sun was just beginning to do something with the snow on the upper ridges, not warming it, not yet just catching it at an angle that made the whole mountain line look like it had been pressed out of hammered silver. He was 40 minutes out when he heard the rider behind him. He didn't recognize the horse at first, but he recognized the rider when he got close enough. Henry Marsh, who worked as a clerk at the land office in Silver Hollow and had the particular energy of a man carrying news he found significant. "Mr. Dawson." Henry pulled up alongside him, his horse blowing hard. "Glad I caught you. There's a gentleman come into town this morning asking about the Dawson property." Caleb kept his horse moving. "What kind of gentleman?" "Lawyer type," Henry said. "From Denver. He's been at the land office since it opened, asking about the deed history, the water rights, the timber lease." Henry paused. "He mentioned Birch." Caleb pulled up. He turned to look at Henry directly. "Gerald Birch sent a Denver lawyer to look at my deed history." "That's what it looked like," Henry said. "I thought you'd want to know before he found something," Caleb said. Henry looked uncomfortable. "I don't know what he's looking for." But he was being thorough about it. Caleb thanked him, turned his horse, and rode back at a pace that was faster than his usual and slower than his impulse. He came into the yard, and Evelyn was already outside. She'd heard the horse, and she looked at his face and said, "What happened?" He told her in 6 sentences. She was already moving toward the house before he finished. "The deed," she said over her shoulder. "Do you have the original?" "In the strong box, front room." She was at the strong box before he'd unsaddled. By the time he came inside, she had the deed on the table and was going through it with the focused, rapid attention she brought to anything that required her real capability. He sat down across from her and waited. She read for 4 minutes without speaking. He counted. Then she said without looking up, "Your water rights." "What about them?" "They're recorded under a joint agreement with the original land grant from 1871, she said. "Your father filed the deed in 1874. Did he file an independent water rights claim at the same time?" Caleb thought back. "I don't know. I was 8 years old. Then we need to check." She looked up. "If the water rights aren't independently filed, they may still technically be attached to the original grant agreement, which, depending on how that agreement was written, could give someone with enough legal resource an argument that the rights aren't exclusively yours." The implications of that settled over him like cold water. "The creek runs through 3 properties, he said slowly. "If someone challenged my water rights, Your cattle operation becomes unsustainable within 1 season, she said. You couldn't run the numbers without that water. She held his gaze. This is what Birch is looking for. He sat back in his chair. He had known Gerald Birch was persistent. He had not known he was this methodical. Can it be fixed? He said. Yes, she said immediately. But it needs to be fixed before he files anything. Once it's in front of a judge, the process takes months, and it costs money you should be spending on the operation. She was already pulling a sheet of paper toward her. I need to write 2 letters. One to the water rights office in Denver, one to the land office here. We file an independent claim this week with the deed as supporting documentation, and we attach the ledger records showing continuous beneficial use. That's the legal standard. Continuous beneficial use of the water resource. 12 years of cattle records showing water-dependent operations builds that case without anyone being able to argue it. You know water rights law, he said. I know enough, she said. My uncle had a dispute with a neighboring operation 7 years ago. I researched it. The principles are the same. She looked at him. Caleb, I need you to trust me on this. He looked at her across the table at the certainty in her face, the specific focused energy that came off her when she was doing what she did best, and he said without hesitation, I trust you. She held his eyes for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. Then she picked up her pen and began to write. The letters went out Friday morning. Danny took them to the post office himself with instructions from Evelyn that were precise enough that even Danny couldn't misunderstand them, which was, as Jesper observed quietly to Caleb, a significant achievement. The waiting was its own particular kind of hard. Caleb was not a man who waited badly. He had the patience of someone who had spent years working with animals and weather and land, all of which operated on their own schedule without reference to human urgency. But this was different. This was his father's land. This was the thing he had built his entire adult life around. And somewhere out in Denver, a man he had never met was looking for a way to take a piece of it. He didn't sleep well on Friday night. He was up at 4, which was early even by his standards, and he was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee when he heard Evelyn's door. She came out in her robe, her hair down the first time he'd seen it down loose to her shoulders, and he looked away quickly and looked back, because looking away felt wrong too. You're not sleeping, she said. Not a question. I'm fine, he said. I know you are, she said, sitting down across from him. But you're still not sleeping. He pushed the coffee pot toward her. She poured herself a cup. They sat in the dark kitchen with the fire. The only light, and didn't speak for a few minutes. Outside the wind had come up. He could hear it working against the eaves. Tell me about your father, she said. He looked at her. You don't have to, she said quickly. I just thought you know things about my situation that I've never told most people, and I don't know much about yours. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not refusal, but is the finding of where to begin. He was a hard man, Caleb said finally. Not cruel, just unyielding. He had a particular idea of how things should be, and he didn't deviate from it. He worked this land until he couldn't, and then he handed it to my brother and expected my brother to want it the same way he had. But your brother didn't. My brother wanted something different. He wasn't wrong to want it, but my father never understood it. He thought Marcus was rejecting him personally. He died believing that. Caleb turned the coffee cup in his hands. I came back after my father died because Marcus didn't want the land, and I couldn't let it go to anyone else. I felt like if it left the family, something would be said about all of us that couldn't be unsaid. That you couldn't hold what you were given, Evelyn said quietly. He looked at her. Yes, that's exactly it. And now Gerald Birch is trying to say that about you, she said. He hadn't framed it that way until she said it. But when she said it, it landed with the particular weight of something true. Yes, he said. She looked at him steadily. He won't succeed, she said. Not reassurance, not comfort. Just a statement of what she had assessed to be fact. He believed her. That was the remarkable thing. He believed her not because he needed to, not because believing was easier than fear, but because she had given him consistent, specific evidence that her assessments were accurate, and he was a man who respected evidence. "How did we get here?" he said, not rhetorically, genuinely. She considered the question seriously. "You wrote an honest letter," she said, "and I was tired of dishonest ones." He almost smiled. That's simple, she said, "and that complicated." The wind pressed against the windows. The fire shifted. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses made a sound and settled again. "Evelyn," he said. She looked at him across the table. He had been going to say something. He had been on the edge of it, felt it right there, the words and the risk of them, and then he saw something flicker in her face. Something careful and slightly afraid that she was usually better at hiding. He pulled back, not because he didn't mean it, because the moment wasn't right. "Thank you," he said instead. "For the letters, for all of it." She held his gaze for a moment that was a beat too long to be comfortable and too short to be conclusive. "Get some sleep," she said. "The land needs you functional." She got up, taking her coffee with her, and went back to her room. He sat at the kitchen table for another hour. He had almost said it. Almost. The response from Denver came faster than either of them expected. 9 days, which was remarkable for government correspondence in winter, and it came not as a letter, but as a rider, which meant someone in the water rights office had felt the urgency of the filing and acted accordingly. Evelyn heard the horse in the yard and was outside before Caleb, which was rare enough that Jesper later told Danny it was worth noting. The rider handed her the document. She read it standing in the cold with her coat half buttoned. Then she looked up. "Independent water rights confirmed and filed," she said. "Continuous beneficial use established. The claim is on record." She looked at Caleb. "It's done." He stood in the yard and felt something move through him. Not triumph exactly, but the particular relief of a man who has been braced against a pressure and felt it suddenly lift. Jesper, who had appeared from somewhere in the background the way Jesper always did when something important was happening, made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated clearly. Danny said, "Yes," and then looked at the others and said more quietly, "Sorry, was that—" "That's fine, Danny," Caleb said. Evelyn was still looking at the document. Something was working in her face that she was not quite managing to keep private, a satisfaction that was close to joy, the particular expression of a person who has done what they set out to do and finds it matters more than they expected. Caleb walked over to her. She looked up at him. "You did that," he said. "We did it," she said. "No," he said firmly but without argument. "You saw the problem before I did. You knew how to fix it. I supplied the documents and signed the letters. You did it." She was quiet for a moment. "Then we're even," she said. "You kept me from having to go back to Boston before I was ready. I kept Gerald Birch from taking your water." He looked at her. "Is that what this was? Keeping score?" "No," she said, and for a moment the careful composure shifted and something real and slightly raw showed through. "No, it wasn't." He nodded. She looked back at the document, and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking. That evening, Ruth Miller showed up again, this time with a bottle of bourbon and no pretense about a borrowed bowl, which was a sign that she had either heard the news already or simply decided that a visit was overdue on its own merits. "I heard about the water rights," she said, walking in and setting the bottle on the table. "Sit down, both of you. We're celebrating." "How did you hear?" Evelyn said. "Henry Marsh has a wife," Ruth said. "His wife has a mouth. We've established the rest." She poured 3 cups without asking. "Also, I heard that Gerald Birch's Denver lawyer left town this afternoon, looking considerably less confident than he arrived." Caleb picked up his cup. "Good," he said. "Also," Ruth said, sitting down and looking between the two of them with the particular expression of a woman who is about to say something both unnecessary and completely necessary, "I want the two of you to look at each other. Neither of them moved. "Now," Ruth said. Caleb looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Caleb. "Good," Ruth said. "Now tell me what you see." "Ruth," Caleb said. "I'll tell you what I see," Ruth said. "I see two grown people who have been dancing around something for going on 2 months and are starting to get on everyone's nerves about it." She picked up her cup. "In my experience, which is considerable, the longer you wait on something like this, the more complicated it gets. And it doesn't need to be complicated. It's actually very simple." "Ruth," Evelyn said with a patience that was being stretched, "this is not." "I know it's not my business," Ruth said. "I know that. But I'm old, and I've watched too many people wait too long on the important things, and I'd rather say an uncomfortable thing now than watch you both do something stupid later." She looked at Evelyn specifically. "You're thinking about leaving. I can see it. You're already thinking about what comes next." Evelyn went very still. "And you," Ruth turned into Caleb, "are letting her think about it without saying a single word, because you've decided it's her choice, and you won't interfere, which is noble and also deeply irritating." She took a sip of her bourbon. "There, I've said it. You can both be angry with me." The room was very quiet. Then Caleb said, "I'm not angry with you, Ruth." "Me neither," Evelyn said in a voice that was quieter than usual. Ruth looked between them. "Good. Then pour me some more of that, and let's have a real conversation." But the real conversation didn't happen that night. Ruth finished her bourbon, declared the situation better than it was not as good as it needs to be, and went home, and Caleb and Evelyn were left in the kitchen with the particular charged silence of two people who have just had something named out loud that they had both been carefully not naming. Evelyn stood and started clearing the cups. "She's not wrong," Evelyn said. Her back was to him. He said nothing. He waited. "I have been thinking about leaving." She turned around. "Not because I want to, but because I have to decide whether staying is what I actually want or whether it's just easier than the alternative." "Those aren't the same thing," he said. "No," she said. "They're not. And I need to be sure which one it is before—" She stopped. "Before what?" he said. She looked at him. "Before I let myself want something, I'm not sure I have the right to." He stood up. He did not move toward her, he just stood, which changed the shape of the room slightly, made the space between them feel more deliberate. "What do you think you don't have the right to?" he said. She was quiet. "Evelyn." "This," she said. "Any of this." "I came here under specific terms, Caleb. I told you from the beginning what I was and wasn't looking for, and now—" She shook her head. "It wouldn't be fair to you to change what was agreed." He looked at her for a long moment. "What if I don't care about what was agreed?" he said. She blinked. "What if," he said carefully, "the terms we set at the beginning are not the terms I'm interested in now?" The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds, which was long enough for both of them to understand that something important had just shifted. Then the door banged open. Danny appeared in his doorway, breathless, with his hat in his hands and snow on his coat, and the particular wild-eyed look of a young man who has just discovered a disaster. "The north barn," he said. "Roof section came down. 3 of the horses got loose. Jesper's already out there, but the bay mare is heading for the timber line." Caleb was moving before Danny finished the sentence. Evelyn was right behind him. The moment, whatever it had been about to become, dissolved into the cold night and the urgent work of finding 3 horses in the dark, which was the kind of work that required everything you had and left no room for anything else. But as Caleb pulled his coat on and ran out into the cold, he was aware of one thing with absolute clarity. She had not said no. She had been about to say something, but she had not said no. They found all 3 horses. The bay mare was halfway to the timber line and took 40 minutes in the dark and the cold to bring back, which was 40 minutes of hard physical work, in temperatures that were dropping fast. And by the time they got the last horse secured and the barn situation assessed, and a temporary structure in place over the damaged section, it was past midnight and everyone was exhausted and cold, to a degree that made conversation seem like too much effort. Jesper organized the repairs with the grim efficiency of a man who had dealt with too many winter emergencies to waste energy being upset about them. Danny, chastened by his part in the delay that had let the situation worsen, worked without complaint and without being asked twice. Tom was simply there, solid and reliable as always. Evelyn worked alongside them. She had grabbed a lamp and extra rope from the tack room before anyone asked her to. She had helped guide the second horse, a young gelding who was frightened and needed a calm voice more than force, back to the temporary enclosure, with a patience and a gentleness that Caleb watched from across the yard and filed away in the particular place where he kept the things about her that mattered. When it was over, when the horses were secured, and the immediate danger was past, and the group of them were standing in the yard in various states of cold and exhaustion, Jesper looked at Evelyn and said, "Good work." It was 2 words. From Jesper, it was approximately the equivalent of a formal citation. Evelyn said, "Thank you," without ceremony. Danny said, "I'm sorry about the door. I should have checked the latch before." "It was the wind, Danny," Caleb said. "Not the latch. Stop." Danny stopped. They went inside. Caleb got the fire going again in the kitchen and put water on. Nobody said much. The particular quiet of people who have just done hard physical work together, which is its own kind of closeness, settled over all of them. Jesper and Danny and Tom eventually went back to the bunkhouse. Evelyn stayed. She sat across from Caleb with her hands wrapped around a cup of hot water they'd run out of coffee, and neither of them mentioned it. And her hair was disheveled, and there was something on her coat sleeve that was probably a piece of the barn roof. And she looked, he thought, more entirely herself than he had ever seen her. "That was not how I expected the evening to end," she said. "No," he said. She looked at him across the table. The kitchen was warm now, the fire doing its work. In the lamplight, her face was very clear to him, every line of thought and tiredness, and something else that he had been watching move toward the surface for weeks. "What were you going to say?" she said. Before Danny came in, he met her eyes. "I was going to say," he said carefully, "that I understand if you came here without intending this. I understand if this isn't what you planned. But I want you to know that what's happened here for me is real. And I'm not asking you to change your plans. I'm not asking you to stay for me. But I needed you to know that this—" He gestured slightly, meaning the kitchen, and the winter, and the 2 months, and all of it. "This has mattered to me, in a way that I didn't expect and don't have a lot of practice talking about." She listened to the whole thing without moving. Then she said, "I'm afraid." "I know," he said. "Not of you," she said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. I'm afraid of—" She stopped. Tried again. "I came here to find something that belonged to me, something I'd built, and I found it. And then I also found—" She shook her head. "I wasn't planning on finding you." "I wasn't planning on you either," he said. "And now I don't know," she said, "how to separate what I want for myself from what I want because of you. How to be sure I'm still choosing my own life and not falling into someone else's," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know how to promise you that those 2 things won't conflict," he said. "I don't think anyone can. But I can tell you what I see when I look at the past 2 months. I see someone who has not once, not for a single day, stopped being entirely herself. You argued with me. You told me when I was wrong. You went after Gerald Birch in his own store. You made decisions without asking my permission, and you were right most of the time, and when you weren't, you said so yourself before I did." He held her gaze. "I don't think staying here would change that. I think you would be exactly who you are in this life or any other." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in a way that might have been the firelight, or might have been something else. "You really believe that?" she said. I really do, he said. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had settled, and the night was very still. I need time, she said finally. I need to think about what I actually want, not what I'm afraid of, what I want. Take it, he said. You're not going to. No, he said. I'm not going to push. You know that. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she said, Good night, Caleb. Good night, he said. She went to her room. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the fire for a long time. She had said I wasn't planning on finding you. She had said it like an admission, like a thing she hadn't meant to say out loud. He turned it over carefully the way he turned over everything that mattered. She was afraid of losing herself. He understood that. He more than understood it. He had spent years afraid of something parallel, afraid of needing anyone enough that losing them would break what he'd built of himself. But she had said, I wasn't planning on finding you, and she had said it like it was real and significant and not something she wanted to dismiss. He was going to have to wait. He was going to have to give her the room to decide. He knew that. What he didn't know, what kept him at that table longer than was probably useful, was what he would do if she decided to leave. He had said he wouldn't ask her to stay. He had meant it. He just hadn't thought through until this exact moment how much that promise might cost him. Outside the Colorado, night was absolute and cold and enormous, and somewhere in the dark, the mountains held their silence, and Caleb Dawson sat with his hands around a cold cup and understood for the first time in his adult life that he had built something he could not afford to lose, and that it had nothing to do with the land. And that realization that he had built something he could not afford to lose, and that it had nothing to do with the land sat inside him for the next 3 days. Like a coal that wouldn't go cold, warming and burning in equal measure, giving him no peace, and no resolution. Only the particular discomfort of a man who has told the truth and must now wait to see what the truth costs him. Evelyn, for her part, was doing what she always did when something frightened her. She worked. She was at the table before him every morning. She reorganized the entire filing system for the supplier correspondence, something that had needed doing for months, and that she attacked now with a focused intensity that Caleb recognized not as productivity, but as displacement. She was putting her hands on something controllable because the thing that actually occupied her mind was not. He understood that. He left her to it. Jesper watched all of this with the expression of a man who is watching a situation develop exactly as he predicted and finds no pleasure in being right. Danny asked Caleb on the third morning in the low voice of someone who has learned that some questions require discretion. Is everything okay with Miss Carter? Everything's fine, Caleb said. She reorganized the filing cabinet twice, Danny said. The second time she reorganized it back to almost exactly how it was before she reorganized it the first time. Caleb looked at him. Leave it alone, Danny. Danny left it alone, but on the fourth morning, something changed. Caleb came into the kitchen and found Evelyn sitting at the table not working, just sitting. Her hands were flat on the table, and her coffee had gone cold in front of her, and she was looking at something that wasn't in the room. He sat down across from her without saying anything. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her eyes were clear. She hadn't been crying. She was past that. She was in the place beyond crying where things have been decided. And the only question is whether you have the nerve to act on them. I got a letter yesterday, she said. I didn't say anything last night because I needed to think about it first. He waited. It's from Richard Alcott, she said. He's the managing partner of a commercial firm in Boston. He's the one my colleague wrote to me about the investigation into my uncle's accounts. He says that my bookkeeping work was, and I'm quoting directly, the most rigorous and accurate financial documentation the firm had seen in a decade. He says that the investigators used my ledgers as the foundation of their entire case. She paused. And he's offering me a position, a real one. Not as a clerk, not as support staff. As a managing bookkeeper with full authority over the firm's accounts and 3 people reporting to me. Caleb said nothing. He was very still. It's everything I wanted, she said. 6 months ago, if someone had described this position to me, I would have taken the first train east without a second thought. And now, he said, His voice was even. He was working hard to keep it even. She looked at him. And now I don't know. And that frightens me more than the offer does. He put his hands flat on the table, the same gesture she'd been making when he came in. He realized as if the table were something solid to hold on to when the rest of the ground was uncertain. When do you need to respond? He said. He's given me 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He did the math without wanting to. 2 weeks was almost Christmas. 2 weeks was 14 more mornings of coffee in the dark, and 14 more evenings of her voice across the table, and 14 more days of the life that had, without his full consent, become the life he wanted. What are you going to do? He said. I don't know yet, she said. I wanted to tell you first, before I decided anything. She paused. That felt important. He looked at her carefully. Why? She met his eyes. Because you're the reason it's a harder decision than it should be. That sentence landed in the room and didn't move. He said, I told you I wouldn't ask you to stay. I know, she said. I meant it. I know that too, she said quietly. That's part of what makes this hard. He went out to the north fence line after breakfast. He needed to move, needed the cold and the physical work to think through, and the fence line was where he went when he needed to be honest with himself without an audience. Jesper found him there an hour later. Of course he did. She told you about the letter, Jesper said, not a question. How do you know about the letter? Ruth Miller, Jesper said, who heard from the postmistress. Caleb drove a staple into a fence post with more force than necessary. This town, Jesper agreed without apology. What are you going to do? Nothing, Caleb said. It's her decision. Jesper was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Let me ask you something. If the situation were reversed, if you had an offer that meant leaving, and she was the one waiting to hear what you decided, what would you want her to do? Caleb stopped working. He stood with the hammer in his hand and thought about it honestly because Jesper deserved honesty, and because the question deserved it. I'd want her to tell me what she wanted, he said. Not what she thought I needed to hear, what she actually wanted. Right, Jesper said. So why are you giving her less than that? Because telling her what I want puts pressure on her decision, Caleb said. And she came here specifically to make decisions that weren't controlled by what someone else wanted from her. There's a difference, Jesper said, between controlling someone's decision and being honest about your own feelings. You know that. Caleb said nothing. She's not fragile, Jesper said. You know that too. You've been treating her like she might break if you say the wrong thing, and she's the woman who walked into Gerald Birch's store and told him off in front of 4 customers. He picked up the wire stretcher and handed it over. Tell her what you want, not as a demand, as a truth. And let her decide with all the information. Caleb took the wire stretcher. When did you get smart about people? He said. I've always been smart about people, Jesper said. You've just been too busy being alone to notice. He came back to the house at midday with a decision made and found the house empty. Not alarming. Evelyn often rode out in the late morning when the weather allowed and the work permitted. But there was something on the kitchen table that he hadn't left there. A piece of paper, his name on the outside in her handwriting. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it for 3 full seconds before he picked it up. He unfolded it. It was not long, 6 sentences. Caleb. I've gone to Ruth's. I needed to talk to someone who would tell me what she actually thinks rather than what she thinks I want to hear. I'll be back by dinner. I want to have a real conversation tonight if you're willing. Not the careful kind we've been having. The real kind. E. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket in the same place he had carried her telegram what felt like a lifetime ago. The real kind. He was ready for the real kind. He went to do the afternoon work and did not watch the road. He was very deliberate about not watching the road. He checked it 3 times. She was back by 4 o'clock before the light went entirely. He heard her horse in the yard, and he did not go to the door because going to the door would have been too obvious, and he retained some dignity. He stayed at the kitchen table where he was going through the timber lease documentation and pretended to be reading it. She came in, took off her coat, and sat down across from him. She looked different than she had this morning. Not resolved exactly, but settled in a way she hadn't been, like she had gone somewhere and put something down that she had been carrying at an awkward angle. Ruth told me something, she said. What did she say? She said that the question I'm asking myself is the wrong question. Evelyn put her hands on the table. I've been asking whether I can have a life here without losing myself. And Ruth said, and she was right, and I didn't want her to be right, which is how I know she was, that I've already answered that question. I've been here for 2 months, and I haven't lost a single piece of myself. I found pieces I forgot I had. She looked at him steadily. The question I actually need to answer is whether I'm brave enough to want something I didn't plan for. He put down the lease documentation. And, he said, and I don't know yet, she said. But I'm closer. She paused. What I do know is that I've been treating this like a problem to solve. Like, if I applied enough logic to it, the right answer would become obvious. And that's not how this works, is it? No, he said. It's not. Ruth said love doesn't come with documentation. She said with a small rueful expression. She said, and I quote, "Girl, you can't audit your way into a life." Despite everything, he almost laughed. That sounds like Ruth. She also said, you're going to have to say something eventually, or she's going to say it for you, and she's not joking. He looked at Evelyn across the table. She's probably not joking, he said. No, Evelyn said. So you might want to say whatever you're going to say before she shows up again. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said it. Not with a speech. Not with the careful, measured language he'd been rehearsing in his head. Just the plain truth, the way he always said things. I want you to stay, he said. Not because the ranch needs you, though it does. Not because I've gotten used to having you here, though I have. But because the past 2 months have been the best 2 months of my life, and I am not interested in going back to what it was before. He paused. I'm not asking you to give up the position in Boston. I'm not asking you to choose between a life and a person. I'm asking whether there's a version of the future you can imagine that includes both this place, this work, and... He stopped. Found the last word. Me. The kitchen was very quiet. Evelyn looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her before, completely unguarded. No calculation in it, no management. Yes, she said, there is. He let out a breath he had been holding for approximately 2 months. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They looked at each other across the table. Then, because neither of them were people who did well with too much open emotional territory. At once Evelyn said, I'm going to write back to Richard Alcott. What are you going to say? He said. That I'm grateful for the offer, she said. And that I'm not available. And that if he needs a referral to a competent bookkeeper in Boston, I know several. He nodded slowly. Are you sure? He said. I'm sure, she said. I was sure when I left Ruth's, actually. I just needed to say it out loud to you first to make sure I meant it. And do you? Yes, she said. And then, with the directness that he had loved about her from the first morning at Miller's Diner. Do you understand what you're agreeing to? I'm not going to become someone who defers to you. I'm not going to stop having opinions or arguing with you when I think you're wrong, or running the parts of this operation that I'm better at than you. I know, he said. And I will need things, she said. I will need to be treated like someone whose judgment matters. I will need to know that what I build here is mine too, not just borrowed space in someone else's life. It will be yours, he said without hesitation. Whatever we build here will be ours, equal. She looked at him very carefully. You mean that, she said. I mean everything I say, he said. You know that by now. She was quiet for a moment. Then that smile, the real one, the full one that changed her entire face, arrived and stayed. Yes, she said, I do. The shift between them after that conversation was not dramatic. There was no moment of sudden closeness, no scene that an observer would have pointed to and said there, that's when everything changed. That was not who they were. They were people who moved in straight lines and small, honest gestures, and that was how the change arrived quietly in the fabric of the ordinary days. He started saying our instead of my when he talked about the operation. She noticed. She didn't point it out. She started doing the same. He moved a second chair to the section of the front room he used as an office because she was spending time there and had been sitting in a dining chair that was the wrong height for the desk. He did it without announcing it. She sat down in it without commenting. They both understood what it meant. Jesper found out the next morning he had a gift for finding things out and said nothing to either of them directly. He told Danny, who told Tom, who said nothing, but smiled for approximately 4 consecutive minutes, which was unprecedented. Ruth Miller heard by afternoon and appeared at the ranch with a cake, which she said was not a celebration cake. It was just a cake, but it had 3 layers and considerable frosting. And no one in the room believed for a moment that it was just a cake. "About time," she said, setting it on the table, and that was the only comment she made, which was Ruth exercising what was for her extraordinary restraint. But 3 days after the kitchen table conversation, 3 days into the new ease between them, 3 days into the version of the situation that felt like solid ground, the second letter arrived. And this one, Evelyn did not keep to herself. She came to find him in the barn in the late morning, and the way she walked told him immediately that something was wrong. Not wrong like danger, but wrong like complexity. The walk of someone carrying news that refuses to arrange itself into a simple shape. "There's another letter," she said, "from Boston." "Alcott again." "No." She paused. "From my uncle." He went still. Thomas Carter had been conspicuously absent from Evelyn's account of her past. Not because she'd hidden him, but because she'd described him the way people describe something they have decided is over, flatly in the past tense, with a finality that didn't invite further excavation. He was her uncle. He had employed her. He had undervalued her. He had been investigated. She had left. That was the story she told. Clean lines, closed doors. "What does he want?" Caleb said. She looked at the letter in her hand. "He's asking me to come back to Boston. Not for the job, the business is under investigation, and he's not operating at full capacity. He says he's—" She stopped. Read directly from the letter. "In a difficult situation, and in need of your particular capabilities, to assist in managing the remaining accounts while the legal situation resolves." She lowered the letter. "He needs me to clean up the mess." "His mess," Caleb said. "Yes. That he made. Yes. While paying you less than half what a 22-year-old man would earn to do the same work. He doesn't mention compensation," she said with a dry precision that was its own answer. Caleb leaned against the stall. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," she said immediately, and then with more honesty, "but it's not that simple." "Why not?" She was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of someone deciding how much of the truth they have the energy to say. "He's my mother's brother," she said. "She died when I was 14. He took me in when my father couldn't manage alone. He paid for my education and bookkeeping. He gave me work when I had nowhere else to go." She looked at the letter. "He's also a man who paid me less than I was worth, ignored everything I contributed, and replaced me with someone less qualified the moment I asserted myself. Both of those things are true at the same time." "Yes," Caleb said, "they are. I owe him something," she said. "I don't like it, but I do. Not the full debt he seems to think I owe him, but something." He was quiet. She looked at him. "Say what you're thinking." "I'm thinking," he said carefully, "that you're the only person who can decide what you owe him. And I'm thinking that whatever you decide, it doesn't change what you and I talked about 3 days ago. Unless you need it to." She looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means that if going to Boston, even for a month, even to help someone who doesn't deserve it, is something your conscience requires, I'm not going to stand in the way of that." He held her gaze. "I told you what we're building here will be yours. That means it'll still be here when you get back." She stared at him. "You'd let me go," she said. "Even now." "I'm not in the business of letting you do things," he said. "You don't require my permission, but yes, if you need to go, go. Come back when you're done." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What if I didn't come back?" His jaw tightened slightly, just slightly. "Then I'd have to live with that, and you'd be all right." He looked at her steadily. "No," he said, "I wouldn't. But I'd survive it, and I wouldn't come after you, and I wouldn't send you letters making you feel guilty about it, because that's not what this is." She looked at him with that fully open expression that she still hadn't entirely gotten comfortable letting him see. "You're a very unusual man," she said quietly. "So I've been told," he said, usually not as a compliment. "It is one," she said. She wrote back to her uncle that evening. Caleb did not read the letter. He did not ask about it. He went to bed before she finished writing, and lay in the dark, and did not sleep, and was honest with himself about why. He had told her she could go. He had meant it. He meant everything he said he'd told her that too. But meaning something and wanting something were occasionally at war with each other. And tonight, they were fighting with particular intensity, and the only resolution available to him was the one he'd already made. He was not going to be the thing that held her back from whatever she needed to do. She had come here looking for a life that belonged to her. He was not going to be the person who took that from her, not even by loving her badly. In the morning, she was at the kitchen table when he came in, and she said without looking up from the ledger she was annotating, "I told him no." He stopped. She looked up. "I told him that I was sorry for his situation, that I wished him well in the legal process, and that my professional services were no longer available to him." She paused. "I also told him that the efficiency protocols I developed during my 6 years at the firm were documented in the secondary ledger system, and that a competent bookkeeper would be able to follow them without my assistance." He sat down. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm sure," she said. "I thought about what I actually owe him. I concluded it was something, but not this. Not dropping my life again to repair damage he caused alone." She looked at the ledger. "I've already given him 6 years. That's enough." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I was afraid you were going to say you were leaving." She looked up. "Last night," he said, lying awake. "I was afraid you were going to walk in this morning and tell me the obligation was too large and you had to go." She put down her pen. "Were you going to try to stop me?" "No," he said. "But you were afraid." "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face. Something that was not quite the smile, but was close to it. The near smile that he had learned was how she looked when something mattered, and she wasn't ready yet to let it show completely. "Good," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "I mean..." She stopped. Started again. "I mean that I want to matter to you. I want this to mean something to you. I don't want to be someone you'd be fine without." "You couldn't be that," he said. "Not anymore?" She looked at him across the table. "I couldn't be that either," she said. "That's what I figured out last night." The next morning, Caleb rode into Silver Hollow. He had one errand. He had been turning it over for 3 days, and he had made the decision the night before in the dark. And he was not a man who unmade decisions once they were made. So he tied his horse at the post outside Henderson's Dry Goods and General Merchandise, and went inside and asked to speak with Matthew Henderson directly. Matthew Henderson was 70 years old, had run the store for 40 years, and was the closest thing Silver Hollow had to a notary, a banker, and a keeper of official records, all in one small and highly competent package. Caleb sat down across from him and said what he'd come to say. When he was done, Matthew Henderson looked at him over his glasses for a long moment. "You're certain," Matthew said. "Yes," Caleb said. "This is not a reversible arrangement," Matthew said. "Once the documentation is drawn up." "I understand that," Caleb said. "I'm certain." Matthew held his gaze a moment longer. Then he nodded and reached for his pen. Caleb rode home in the early afternoon with an envelope in his coat pocket. He found Evelyn at the table she had in the 3 weeks since the conversation essentially taken over the east-facing corner of the front room as her own working space, and she had arranged it with the particular efficiency of someone who finally had authority over her own environment and was not wasting it. He sat down across from her. She looked up. He put the envelope on the table between them. She looked at it, then at him. "What is this?" "Open it," he said. She opened it carefully, read the document inside. He watched her face as she read, watched the careful, analytical expression she wore when she was processing something, and then watched it shift very slowly into something he had never seen on her before. Not the smile, not the near smile, not even the fully open expression she'd allowed herself in vulnerable moments. Something deeper than all of those. Caleb. His name in her mouth was different now than the first time she had used it fuller, heavier, like it meant more than one thing. "This is half the property." "Yes," he said. "The legal documentation puts half the ranch in my name." "Yes." She looked up from the document. "You didn't ask me first." "No," he said. "Because I wasn't asking you. I was telling you." He held her gaze. "You said you needed to know that what you build here is yours. Not borrowed space, yours." He gestured at the document. "That's yours, legally, on record. Not because I'm asking you to marry me, that's a different conversation if you want to have it someday. But because you have been here for 2 months, and in those 2 months you have saved this operation twice, built something real, and given this place a future it didn't have before you arrived." He paused. "You earned it." And I'm not interested in the kind of partnership where one person does the work and the other person holds the deed. She was very still. You can't, she started. I can, he said. I just did. Gerald Birch is going to have a complete collapse, she said. I'm counting on it, he said. She looked back at the document. Her hands, he noticed, were not entirely steady. This is the most significant thing anyone has ever done for me, she said quietly. You made it possible, he said. I just made it official. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright. The firelight probably. Or probably not only the firelight. I don't know what to say, she said. You don't have to say anything, he said. It's already done. She looked at the document for a long moment. Then, she set it down carefully on the table between them. Carefully, the way you set down something you intend to keep, and she reached across the table and put her hand over his. Just that, just her hand on his hand. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that for a moment, not speaking, not needing to, while outside the Colorado winter pressed its silence against the windows, and inside, the fire burned steady and warm, and between them on the table, a piece of paper said something that both of them already knew, but that now for the first time the world could see too. This was hers. He was hers. And somewhere in the deep quiet of that mountain evening, with the document on the table, and her hand in his, and 11 more years of this life stretching ahead of them, Evelyn Carter understood something she had arrived in Colorado not knowing, and was leaving ignorance of for good. A life of your own didn't mean a life alone. It meant a life you chose every day, with full knowledge of what you were choosing and why. And she had chosen. She just hadn't known yet how that choosing would end, because there was still one thing between them that hadn't been said. One thing that Caleb was carrying alone that Evelyn didn't know about yet. And when it came out, and it would come out because the things we carry alone always do. Eventually, it was going to change everything they'd built, one more time. And when it came out, and it would come out because the things we carry alone always do. Eventually, it was going to change everything they'd built one more time, and not in the way either of them feared, but in the way that only the truth said, at the right moment by the right person, can change something, not by breaking it, but by making it finally, completely whole. It came out on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday. Not a Tuesday that announced itself with bad weather or omens, or the particular tension that sometimes precedes hard things. It was a plain cold Tuesday in late December, the kind of day that is gray from the start, and stays that way, the sky the color of old pewter, and the ground iron hard underfoot. And Caleb had been quieter than usual since morning, in a way that Evelyn had noticed and filed away, without comment, because she had learned by now the difference between his ordinary quiet and the quiet that meant something was working in him that he hadn't found words for yet. She gave him room. She worked at her desk. She did not ask. He came in from the afternoon work earlier than expected, and he sat down at the kitchen table, and he did not take his coat off, which meant he hadn't intended to sit down. He had sat down because something had stopped him, some internal weight that had finally gotten too heavy to carry standing up. Evelyn came to the doorway and looked at him. "Caleb," she said. He looked up. His face was different, not broken. Caleb Dawson did not break. It was not in his construction, but stripped of the careful management he usually kept in place. What was underneath it was something old and heavy and tired, the face of a man who has been holding something for so long, he has stopped noticing the weight until the moment he sets it down and feels the sudden ache of muscles that have been clenched for years. She sat down across from him. She did not say what is wrong, or are you all right, or any of the other things people say when they're not sure how to enter a difficult conversation. She simply sat, present, waiting, the way he had waited for her so many times without pressure. He looked at his hands on the table. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. "All right," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When I put the property in your name, half of it, I told you it wasn't me asking you to marry me, that it was a separate thing." "Yes," she said carefully. "That was true," he said. "But it wasn't the whole truth." He looked up. "The whole truth is that I wanted to ask you. I've wanted to since before the water rights letter, before Ruth showed up with bourbon, before most of it. And I didn't because I was afraid of what asking would do to what we had afraid. It would make you feel like the ledger and the property, and all of it was a setup, a slow negotiation toward something you'd told me from the beginning you hadn't come here for. She was very still. So I gave you the property first, he said. Because I needed you to have it before I asked. Because I needed you to know completely, without any doubt, that what I'm going to ask you has nothing to do with the land, with the operation, with any of it. You already have all of that. This is something else. He reached into his coat pocket. He put a small object on the table between them. It was a ring. Simple and plain, not the delicate, ornate thing that jewelers in Boston would have considered appropriate for a woman of quality. It was a wide band of silver, smooth and substantial, with a single stone that was the particular blue-gray of mountain water in early morning. It was, Evelyn thought, the most honest piece of jewelry she had ever seen, because it looked exactly like the man who had chosen it. No excess, no performance. Just the real thing, solidly made to last. She looked at it. She looked at him. "Evelyn Carter," he said. "I am not asking you to become someone's wife in the way that word has usually meant someone who gives up her name and her work and her judgment to become an extension of someone else. I know you. I know what that cost you before, and I am not willing to be that cost to you." His voice was steady. "I'm asking you to be my partner. Legal partner, life partner, the person whose name is on the deed and in the books and in this house. I'm asking you to build this with me, not for me, not under me, with me. Equal and permanent." He stopped. Let it sit. "That's what I'm asking," he said. "And if the answer is no, if you need more time, or if this still isn't what you want, I meant what I said before. Everything you have here is already yours. That doesn't change." She looked at the ring on the table. Then she looked at him for a long moment, a look that he held without flinching, without anxious reassurance, without filling the silence with anything at all. He just let her look, let her take whatever time she needed. She said, "You've been carrying this since before the property document." "Yes," he said. "That's why you did the property first. You were making sure I knew the question wasn't about ownership." "Yes," he said. She shook her head slowly, not in refusal, in something closer to wonder. "Caleb," she said, "when I stepped off that train and told you I didn't come here for a husband, do you know what I was actually saying? You were saying you wouldn't be managed," he said. "You wouldn't be acquired. You weren't a problem someone could solve by marrying you." "Yes," she said. "All of that." She looked at the ring. "But I was also terrified. I didn't admit that until much later, not even to myself. I was terrified that the only version of marriage I'd ever seen up close was the version that cost women everything they were. My mother gave up her work, her opinions, her friendships, her entire self, and she was happy for a time, and then my father's world closed in around her, and she had nothing left that was just hers." She paused. "She died without anything that was just hers." He said nothing. He just listened. "I swore I wouldn't do that," Evelyn said. "I swore so hard I turned the swearing into armor, and I wore that armor so long I forgot it was armor and started thinking it was skin." She looked at him. "And then I came here, and you didn't try to take any of it off. You just showed me every day that I didn't need to wear it around you." He held her gaze. "I'm still afraid," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I'm afraid of how much I want this because I've wanted things before, and lost them or had them taken, or found out they were never quite what I thought." "I know," he said. "I'm afraid of needing you," she said. "Specifically. Not in the abstract, I'm afraid of the specific version of needing you that I've developed over the past 3 months, where I notice when you're not in the room, and where your opinion is, the first one I want when something matters, and where I have—" She stopped, started again. "Where I have built my mornings around the sound of you in the kitchen before I come out." That last thing landed between them quietly and completely. He said, "I've been building my mornings around you since the second week." She looked at him. "You have—" "The day you weren't up before me," he said. "I was worried about you for 45 minutes before you appeared. You'd just slept in. I felt like an idiot." He paused. "I've been feeling like an idiot about you for most of 3 months." She laughed. Real and sudden and completely uncontrolled the full laugh he had learned was the most honest thing she did. "Yes," she said. He blinked. "Yes, yes," she said again, steadier now. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to partner, and permanent, and equal, and all of it. Yes." She looked at the ring on the table. "Put it on my hand before I say something else embarrassing." He picked up the ring. He reached across the table and she gave him her hand, and he put the ring on her finger with the steadiness of a man who has waited a long time for something and is not going to rush the moment now that it has arrived. They both looked at her hand for a moment. Then she looked up at him. "If I cry," she said, "I'm blaming the elevation." "The elevation is very high," he agreed. And she did cry briefly 2 seconds, and she blinked it away with the efficient practicality she brought to everything. And he reached across the table and put his other hand over hers and held it, and neither of them moved for a long time. Outside, the gray Tuesday pressed against the windows. Inside, the fire burned. And in the kitchen of a mountain ranch in Colorado in December of 1884, two people who had arrived at each other by the most circuitous and unlikely route held onto each other's hands and understood both of them completely that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Jesper found out before dinner. No one told him. He simply appeared in the kitchen doorway while Evelyn was making bread, and Caleb was going over the timber lease documentation, and he looked at Evelyn's left hand, and he looked at Caleb, and he looked back at Evelyn's hand, and he said, "Well, finally," in the tone of a man who has been waiting for a conclusion for a very long time and is relieved to have arrived at it. Then he went back outside. Danny found out at dinner when he reached across the table for the salt shaker and stopped mid-reach because he had seen the ring. He looked at Evelyn, looked at Caleb, looked back at Evelyn. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession before settling on one of such complete and transparent happiness that even Tom across the table noticed it. "Congratulations," Tom said, 2 words, which from Tom was essentially a speech. Danny said, "Oh, thank goodness," and then covered his mouth and said through his hand, "Sorry. We've all been a little sorry," and then recovered himself and said more formally, "Congratulations, Miss Carter. Mr. Dawson?" "Thank you, Danny," Evelyn said. Caleb handed him the salt shaker without comment. Ruth Miller appeared the next morning at 7 o'clock with a letter she said she'd been meaning to deliver for a week, which was obviously not true, and she sat down at the table and drank 3 cups of coffee and talked about absolutely everything except the ring on Evelyn's hand for the first 45 minutes, building toward it with such theatrical patience that by the time she said, as if just noticing it, "Oh, is that what I think it is?" both Caleb and Evelyn were almost grateful. "Yes," Evelyn said. Ruth set down her cup. And then Ruth Miller, who had an opinion on everything and had never been known to withhold one, said nothing at all for approximately 10 seconds. She looked at Caleb. She looked at Evelyn. Her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the firelight. "Your mother would have liked her," she said to Caleb. He was quiet for a moment. "I think so too," he said. Ruth nodded, picked up her cup, moved on to other topics. But her hand was not quite steady as she lifted the cup, and Evelyn, who noticed everything, saw it and said nothing because some things don't need to be said to be understood. The news reached Silver Hollow by the end of the week. It reached Gerald Birch on Friday through his usual channels, and his reaction was reported secondhand by Henry Marsh's wife to Ruth Miller, to Jesper, to Danny, who told Caleb with barely contained glee that Birch had apparently gone very quiet, and then said something about how he hoped the partnership would be to the ranch's benefit, which was, as Danny pointed out, the most gracious thing Gerald Birch had ever said about anything, and therefore the clearest possible sign that he understood he had lost. Caleb received this news without visible satisfaction. Evelyn received it with a small, precise smile that lasted exactly 3 seconds, and then disappeared because she was already thinking about the next thing. The next thing was the spring operation planning, which she had been quietly working on for 2 weeks, and which she now spread across the kitchen table on a Saturday morning with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting to do this and is not going to waste the opportunity. Caleb sat across from her and looked at what she'd put together. It was thorough. It was specific. It was in several places better than what he would have done alone, and in 2 places it identified approaches to the spring cattle management that he had not considered, and that when she explained the logic were obviously correct. "Where did you learn this?" he said. "From watching you," she said. "And from the accounts. And from Jesper, he knows more about the cattle operation than anyone gives him credit for, including you." "I know he does," Caleb said. "Then you should tell him that," she said. He looked at her. "I'm serious," she said. "He's been here 11 years, and you tell him you need him by keeping him employed. That's not the same as saying it." He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. "I know," she said without triumph. "Just the plain fact of it." He went to find Jesper after lunch. He found him in the tack room repairing a bridle with the patient attention Jesper gave to everything, and he stood in the doorway for a moment and said, "I want to tell you something." Jesper looked up. "You've held this operation together in ways I haven't acknowledged properly," Caleb said. "You've been the backbone of it, particularly in the years when I was not in good shape. And I should have said that explicitly a long time ago." Jesper looked at him for a moment. His expression was complicated, a man who has been seen clearly and is not sure what to do with it. "She put you up to this," Jesper said. "She pointed out I hadn't done it," Caleb said. "That's different." Jesper looked back at the bridle. "Well," he said. "All right." And then after a pause, "You're not wrong about the backbone." "I know I'm not," Caleb said. Jesper almost smiled. "She's good for you," he said. "She makes you say the things you think and don't say." "Yes," Caleb said. "That's going to be uncomfortable regularly." "It already has been," Caleb said. Jesper did smile, then fully, the rare full smile that changed his face. "Good," he said. "Comfortable men don't build anything worth having." January arrived with weather that was serious and cold and uncompromising, and the ranch settled into the deep winter rhythm that Evelyn was now familiar enough with to move inside without friction. The early mornings, the urgent work, the particular economy of effort that winter demanded, the ways the days contracted around heat and light and essential tasks and left the rest for spring. She realized one morning, not counting the days until spring. She had been counting days unconsciously. She hadn't noticed she was doing it until she stopped, since somewhere in November, measuring the distance between where she was and where she was going. It was a habit built over years of living in situations she was enduring rather than choosing. She wasn't counting anymore. She was just living the day she was in. That realization, quiet and private, arrived on a Wednesday morning when she came into the kitchen and found Caleb already there. Coffee-made fire built up the particular settled-in early morning stillness that she had come to understand as one of his gifts to the day, and she sat down and took the cup he slid across to her and felt without drama or ceremony, completely at home. It was the most ordinary feeling she had ever had. It was the most extraordinary feeling she had ever had. She didn't say any of this out loud. She drank her coffee and looked at the plan for the day's work that Caleb had roughed out on a piece of paper, and she added 2 things he'd forgotten, and he looked at them and said, "Right," and crossed out something else, and she said, "No, keep that," and he kept it. And they argued in the easy, productive way they argued, not with anger, not for dominance, but the way people argue when they're both trying to find the right answer and they trust each other enough to push. And the day began. It was, she thought, the best possible version of an ordinary day. She intended to have many more of them. The twist that Caleb had been carrying arrived not as a confession, but as a visitor, which was worse because it gave him no warning and no chance to manage the context. It was a Thursday, 3 weeks into January, when a rider came up to the ranch in the mid-morning. Not Henry Marsh, not anyone from Silver Hollow. A stranger. A man in a good coat, who tied his horse at the post with the practiced ease of someone who traveled often and well, and who came to the door and asked for Caleb Dawson, with the particular quiet assurance of a man who was confident he would be received. Evelyn answered the door. She looked at the man. The man looked at her. Something moved across his face, surprise, she thought, and something more complicated. "I'm looking for Caleb," he said. "I'm his brother, Marcus Dawson." Caleb came in from the barn 10 minutes later and found his brother sitting at his kitchen table drinking coffee that Evelyn had poured and talking to her with the easy, practiced warmth of a man who was very good at talking to people and did it constantly. Marcus Dawson was 2 years older than Caleb, taller than Caleb, and dressed with the casual elegance of someone who had spent 15 years in Denver building what was by most accounts a very successful commercial enterprise. He was charming in the immediate, effortless way that Caleb had never been and had never tried to be. Caleb stopped in the doorway. Marcus looked up. "Little brother," he said. "Marcus," Caleb said. His voice was even. Nothing in his face moved. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the territory," Marcus said. "Business. I wanted to stop." He paused, and something in his tone shifted, became less smooth, more real. "I heard some things. I wanted to see for myself." "What things?" Caleb said. Marcus looked at Evelyn, then back at Caleb. "Could we—" "She stays," Caleb said. Marcus took that in, looked at Evelyn's hand, saw the ring. Something crossed his face that was not quite guilt, but was adjacent to it. "All right," Marcus said. He put his coffee cup down. "I heard about the water rights business, about Birch and the Denver lawyer. I heard you almost lost the water claim." "Almost," Caleb said. "I also heard—" Marcus stopped, seemed to decide something. "I heard it from Roy Callahan. He's a business acquaintance of mine in Denver. He mentioned calling in a note on a Colorado ranch operation, and when I heard the name, He looked at his hands on the table. "Roy Callahan is someone I know. I didn't know until 2 weeks ago that he had a note on this property, and I didn't know until last week that Gerald Birch was behind it." The kitchen was very quiet. "But you know Gerald Birch," Caleb said. It was not a question. Marcus looked up. "Yes." "How long?" A pause. 4 years. Caleb's jaw tightened. That was the only movement in his face. "Birch offered to buy this property 2 years ago." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "Did you know he was going to make that offer?" Another pause. Longer. "He mentioned it. I didn't think—" He stopped. "I didn't think he'd actually pursue it. I didn't know he had connections to Callahan. I didn't know about the lawyer. I didn't know about any of it until it was already happening." "But you knew about the original offer," Caleb said. "Yes," Marcus said. "And you said nothing to me." "No," Marcus said. "I didn't." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has history in it. Old history. A long record of things said and unsaid between two brothers who had taken very different paths from the same starting point. Evelyn, who could feel the weight of it filling the room, sat very still and said nothing. She had learned from long practice when to speak and when to let silence do its necessary work. "Why are you here, Marcus?" Caleb said finally. Marcus looked at him directly. "Because Birch came to see me last week. He wanted to know if I would be interested in a share of the property if the note situation resolved in his favor." He paused. That was when I understood how serious it was, and what my connection to him, even indirect, might have cost you. "It almost cost me the water rights," Caleb said. "Which would have cost me the cattle operation, which would have cost me the ranch." "I know," Marcus said. "I know that now." He looked at the table. "I came to tell you, and to say I'm sorry. Not for what I didn't do, I didn't know about most of it. But for not telling you about Birch when I should have, for assuming it was just talk and would come to nothing." Caleb was still for a long moment. Evelyn watched him, watched the old weight of it moving in his face, the history between them, the decades of being the second son who stayed and built, while the first son left and built something different, and all the complicated feelings that lived in that story that neither of them had ever fully said. You came a long way to say that, Caleb said. It needed saying in person, Marcus said. Yes, Caleb said. It did. Another silence. Then Marcus said, She saved the water rights. Caleb looked at Evelyn. She did, he said. Marcus looked at Evelyn with something frank and genuine in his expression. How? Continuous beneficial use documentation and an independent filing, Evelyn said. The ledger records provided 12 years of evidence. The claim was on record before Birch's lawyer found anything to work with. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You understood the legal standard. I researched it, she said. I had reason to. He looked at her ring. You're going to marry my brother. I am, she said. He's going to drive you mad, Marcus said. He doesn't talk enough. I talk enough, Caleb said. You talk when you think it's necessary, Marcus said, which is a third of the time at most. He looked at Evelyn. Does that bother you? No, she said. I spent 6 years surrounded by men who talked 3 times more than necessary and said nothing worth hearing. I find the ratio refreshing. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb. I like her, he said. I know, Caleb said. Everyone does. Something shifted between the brothers, then something old and stubborn cracking very slightly at one edge. Not healed, not even close to healed, but open in a way it had not been before. Marcus stayed for lunch. He and Caleb talked haltingly at first, then with more ease the way men who know each other at a deep level talk when they have gotten the hard part out of the way and are feeling their route back to something more ordinary. Evelyn listened and participated when they pulled her in and let them have what they needed when they didn't. She learned things in that conversation that Caleb hadn't told her directly, not because he'd hidden them, but because they were the kind of things that are hard to find the right entry point for. She learned that their mother had died when Caleb was 12 and Marcus was 14. She learned that their father had coped with that grief by demanding more from both of them than any boy should have had to give, and that Marcus had eventually broken from it by leaving, and that Caleb had coped with it by becoming someone who needed nothing from anyone. She learned that the brothers had not spoken in 3 years before today, and that the distance between them was not about the land specifically, but about all the things neither of them had found words for yet. By the time Marcus got back on his horse in the early afternoon, something had shifted in Caleb's face, some old clenched thing that Evelyn had sensed without being able to name it, and that she could see now in its absence had been there all along. Marcus shook Caleb's hand. Then unexpectedly he pulled him into a brief, slightly awkward embrace, the embrace of 2 men who don't do this often and are both aware of it and doing it anyway. Caleb held on for exactly 3 seconds. Then Marcus tipped his hat at Evelyn and rode out. Caleb stood in the yard watching him go until he was out of sight. Evelyn came and stood beside him. She didn't say anything. She just stood there close enough that their arms touched slightly and let him have whatever he was feeling. After a while he said, I should have told you about Marcus. You didn't owe me that, she said. Not until you were ready. I should have been ready sooner, he said. He stopped. We've been bad at being brothers for a long time. I don't know if today fixed it. It started it, she said. He looked at her. That's what today was, she said. A beginning, not a resolution. Resolutions take longer. She paused. But beginnings are what make them possible. He was quiet for a moment. You're good at this, he said. At what? Knowing what something is, he said. Not making it more or less than it is, just seeing it clearly. She thought about that. I had to learn it, she said. For a long time I was bad at it. I either made things bigger than they were because I was afraid, or I made them smaller so I didn't have to deal with them. She looked at the road where Marcus had disappeared. I'm still learning. So am I, he said. They stood there together for a moment in the cold January air, their breath coming in small white clouds that dissipated in the same direction. Then she said, Come inside. I'm going to make something. What? I don't know yet, she said. Something warm. He followed her inside. Spring came to the Colorado mountains the way it always did. Not all at once. Not with the sudden dramatic arrival of warmth that people from flatter places might expect, but incrementally. The cold backing off by degrees. The snow retreating up the ridgelines, the creek running higher and louder as the melt began, and the animals moving differently. All of them responding to something in the air that knew before any person could see it clearly that the hard season was ending. Evelyn noticed it first. She noticed the way the light was different in the morning. Not warmer exactly, not yet, but longer, arriving at the kitchen window a few minutes earlier each week, in a way that was barely perceptible day to day. But over weeks added up to a completely different quality of morning. She noticed it, and said nothing for several days because she was superstitious enough, and she'd have been surprised to know she was superstitious at all, not to name a good thing before it was certain. When she finally said it, she said it to Caleb at the breakfast table on a morning in late February. Very simply, spring's coming. He looked up from his coffee, looked at the window, looked back at her. Yes, he said. The creek's going to run high, she said. It always does, he said. It'll take the south fence section if we don't reinforce it before the full melt. Then we should start this week, she said. I was thinking the same thing, he said. She reached across the table and picked up the schedule she'd been working on. I've already put it in the plan. He looked at the plan, looked at her. You put it in before I mentioned it. I knew you'd mention it, she said. So I planned for it. He looked at the plan for a moment. Then he said, move it to Thursday. The ground will be better by Thursday. She made the change. Also, he said, the timber buyer from Leadville is coming Friday. I know, she said. I scheduled the meeting. I'll be there. He looked at her. You don't need to ask, she said without looking up. It's in my name too. I know, he said. I was going to say good. She looked up. Oh. Good, he said again. Your numbers are better than mine. He'll get a better deal out of me alone. She felt the familiar small warmth of that. The specific warmth of being valued for the thing you actually were, without performance, without politics, without having to argue for your right to be in the room. I'll try not to be too ruthless, she said. Be as ruthless as you need to be, he said. He can afford it. She smiled. The wedding was in March. Not a large wedding. Neither of them wanted a large wedding. And they had reached that conclusion independently and simultaneously, which was the way they reached most conclusions, and which continued to be to both of them one of the most quietly remarkable things about the other. Ruth Miller said it was the most sensible thing she'd heard either of them say, and took it upon herself to organize what there was to organize, which consisted of a simple ceremony in the front room of the ranch house. The judge who rode circuit through Silver Hollow, and a gathering afterward that included Jesper and Danny and Tom and Ruth and Henry Marsh and his wife, and approximately 15 people from Silver Hollow who had over the course of the winter shifted their opinion of Evelyn Carter from curious skepticism to something much closer to admiration. Marcus came. He arrived the day before and stayed the night in the bunkhouse, which Danny took as a personal honor and organized around with great seriousness. He and Caleb sat up late talking. Evelyn didn't hear the words, but she could hear the cadence of it through the wall, the long conversation between them that had been waiting to be had, and she lay in the dark and listened to the sound of it, and thought this too is what she'd built here. Not just the ledger and the land and the operation. This. The morning of the ceremony, Evelyn dressed in the front room with Ruth's assistance, which consisted primarily of Ruth making several observations about the dress that were accurate and somewhat bossy, and delivered with such obvious affection that Evelyn found she didn't mind at all. You're not nervous, Ruth observed. No, Evelyn said. Most brides are nervous. I've had 3 months to decide this, Evelyn said. I'm not nervous about the decision. I've already made it. I'm just ready. Ruth looked at her. You know, Ruth said, when you stepped off that train, half this town had already decided what your story was. Woman comes west, finds a husband, settles down, disappears into someone else's life. I know, Evelyn said. You wrote a different story, Ruth said. We did, Evelyn said. Ruth pressed her hand, didn't say anything else, but her eyes were bright again in that way that had nothing to do with the light. Caleb was standing at the front of the room when Evelyn came in. He was wearing the cleanest version of himself. Good jacket, the good shirt his hair controlled for once, his boots polished to a standard that told her Jesper had been involved at some point. He was holding his hat in his hands, with the particular composure of a man who is feeling a great deal and is accustomed to showing very little. When she came in, he looked at her. The composure shifted. Not broke. Caleb Dawson didn't break, but became something more transparent. And what she saw through it was so clear and so real, and so quietly completely certain, that she felt it in her chest, like something clicking solidly into place. She walked to him. He held out his hand. She took it. Ready, she said. Since November, he said. She almost laughed, held it. The judge began. It was Jesper who said it best later at the gathering when Ruth Miller had pressed him for a toast, and he had stood up with his cup and looked around the room for a moment before he spoke. I've known Caleb Dawson for 11 years, he said. And I can tell you that for most of those 11 years, this was a man who had decided that needing anyone was a form of weakness he wasn't willing to carry. He built something great here. But he built it with his back to the world, and the only thing that was missing, the only thing, was someone to build it facing him. He looked at Evelyn. She didn't come here looking for a husband, he said. Everybody knows that. She came here looking for a life. And what she found was that the life she was building and the life she found here were the same life, just seen clearly. He lifted his cup. To the Dawsons, who are between them the most sensible and stubborn and right people I have had the privilege of working alongside. Danny said, "Hear, hear," with great feeling. Tom nodded. Ruth Miller raised her cup and said nothing, which was for Ruth a form of eloquence. Caleb looked at Evelyn. She was already looking at him. The most sensible and stubborn, she said quietly. In his defense, Caleb said equally quiet, he's not wrong. She looked at the room, at Jesper and Danny and Tom and Ruth and Marcus, and all the people who had become without her, planning it, the texture of her life here. And then she looked back at her husband, who was watching her with that full, unguarded attention that she had learned was his version of saying everything at once. She thought about the train platform. The bag dropped at his feet. I didn't come here for a husband. The truth of that statement, and the larger truth underneath it, that she hadn't known how to say yet, that she had come here looking for a life where she could be entirely unapologetically herself, not someone's wife, not someone's employee, not someone's good girl who kept the books and swallowed her ideas and was grateful for the borrowed corner of someone else's dream. She had come here looking for the real thing, and she had found it. Not the way she planned, not the shape she expected, but real in every way that mattered in the cold mornings and the ledger columns and the fence wire and the water rights and the bread that was better than his and the coffee that was ready before she got there and the hand that held hers not to direct her somewhere but simply because it wanted to be there. She had built this. They had built this. And it was theirs equally permanently fully in a way that nothing in her life had ever been before. The fire burned in the hearth. The voices of the people they loved moved through the warm room around them. Outside, the March Mountains held their breath at the edge of spring, and the creek ran high with the beginning of the melt and the land. Their land, both their names on the deed on the record in permanent ink, waited for what they would make of it next. Evelyn Carter. Dawson put her hand in her husband's and looked at what they had become. She had not come here for a husband. She had come here for a life, and she had gotten both, not because love had rescued her, not because Caleb had completed her, but because two people who understood the real cost of loneliness had chosen with full knowledge, with full courage, and with the clear-eyed honesty That was the truest thing about both of them, to stop carrying their lives alone. That was the only frontier that had ever really mattered, and they had crossed it together.